Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests and respected speakers. It is with great pleasure that I extend a warm welcome to our distinguished speakers for today's master class on energy transition strategies and pathways to net zero power system. We are honored to have Mr. Reji Kumar Pillai, President ISGF. Welcome, sir. We are honored to have Mr. Anant Venkateswaram, industry professional ISGF and Hitachi Energy. Welcome, sir. We are honored to have Dr. Rahul Tongia, senior fellow CSEP, founding advisor ISGF. He will join later. We are honored to have Glenn Mr. Glenn, Manager Advanced Grid Operation and Technology, PECO, USA. We are honored to have Mani Vadari, Founder and President, Modern Grid Solution. He will join with on virtual. Now, I would like to Mr. Reji Kumar Pillai to start the master class with his opening remark. Over to you, sir.
Good morning. This is the 10th edition of India Smart Utility Week, and from the third edition onwards, we have been doing the master classes. Prior to the opening day, we've been, and that is basically the person who motivated or persuaded me to start this masterclass series is Anand. And he is a regular teacher at Distributech, SIGRE, all international events. Just 2 weeks ago, we were at SIGRE, and one full day they've been conducting programs at SIGRE in Orlando. So, as you know, we are going through a major transformation in the energy sector, energy transition, we all call it. More than 130 countries have declared their net zero target, starting from 2045 to 2070. India is 2070, China is 2060, some of them are 2045. So in next 20 to 30 years, we will see many countries have set the target for which actually nobody knows what to do, but a lot of experts say many things, and because nobody has done it in the past. In the 140 years of electricity, our experience with electricity and electricity grid in last 140 years, we have something like 8 terawatt of installed capacity globally. And now the strategy which has emerged as the central theme for decarbonization is electrify everything. Electrify almost all human activities, including transport, agriculture, everything, and take the power sector and decarbonize it from fossil fuels to green resources. So this is a strategy which globally everybody is today following. We don't know that's a right one or not. Maybe some mid-course correction may be required as we move forward. With only renewables can a big power system run 24/7, because all renewable resources are variable. It can be 100% not available to how many hours or days of storage we need, we don't know. With intermittent renewables and storage systems, whatever storage we have, can a large power system like India, where we have 430 gigawatt of installed capacity, can that sustain? Our peak load already last year was 230 gigawatt in the summer. This year it's expected to be even more. So we don't know. And we have to clearly understand this new path which you are treading is a path which is unknown. What we don't know, we don't know. That's an underlining word. So some of the think tanks recently came out with some numbers which talks about overbuild renewables. So triple the capacity in next 30 to 40 years, because everything going to get electrified. About 2 billion machines which are running today on heat or fossil fuels will get electrified in next 25 to 30 years. So to support that and many other activities, transport, as you see, as we speak, transport is getting electrified. Last year, about 3 million barrels of oil per day was displaced because of about 40 million electric vehicles which are on the road, which is expected to increase drastically. And when that happens, some very interesting things which nobody has knew about it, the numbers coming out is, the entire shipping, about 45% of the shipping is coal. Yeah, coal transportation is 45%. Another 15% is oil and gas. And these two things, if we are going to be moving out of fossil fuel, and if the 60% of the total shipping coming down to some small number, how is that industry going to survey? And interestingly, there are some indicators also. You'd have heard of VLCC, very large crude carrier. There are around 1,200 of them are in operation. Every year there used to be 30, 40 new order. 2023, just one new order for a VLCC. New VLCC, just one order. This is another very interesting fact. So some very interesting reports which came in November 2023 from BNEF, they talk about tripling the generation capacity in next 40 years. And also building transmission and distribution network to evacuate power from the new renewable sources or new sources which we are going to add. And it is equivalent to doubling the existing grid. There are about 80 million kilometers of transmission and distribution lines globally. We need to double that in next 25 years, and the estimated investment is about $21 trillion. Money may come, but where are the people, where are the materials to double what we build in 140 years as a existing global grid? We need to double it in next 25 years. Is it the right way? Is it going to work? We don't know, but everybody is, there's a consensus in this line of thinking, and everybody is looking into it, and it's a huge investment and a huge opportunity for business and for the young generation. So electricity was a very, the electricity generation, transmission, distribution was not very attractive segment for people for employment. We always used to get not the best of people. They wanted to go something else in the past, and last 25 years they wanted to go for coding. And now all on a sudden electricity has become a very, very attractive. All new technologies are being experimented in power sector before it is being done in other sectors. The next room you can see some of the very interesting things which we will be demonstrating on metaverse, the immersive technologies. So all of them have, all new technologies which has come out in last 20 years have a application, practical application in the power sector which is transforming fast. So what we have been trying to do, bring new technologies, give exposure for our people, bring experts from outside, and the gap between what happens in America or Europe or Japan and what happens in India has been drastically reduced. Earlier it was 5 to 10 years, now it is few months. Whatever is introduced there, we get it here also, and it's available. Somebody or the other is available. In fact, last year on our same event was on 28th February was the master classes, and 1, 2, 3 March was the India Smart Utility Week. 28th February we conducted a class like this, which was on generative AI tools. That's the first class ever in the world. Some 22 tools which are on generative AI were discussed and demonstrated there, and that 6 hours of video available on ISGF website. Such classes happened in North America and other places much later. So that way, whatever we go see, think it has a relevance to India and the power system, we invite them to come and demonstrate in our program and discuss. And next 3 days you will see, today plus another 3 days, 4 days, you will see a lot of new things being not yet implemented. Some of them implemented, some of them will be implemented, and doing some very, very interesting topics. And also ISGF embarked on some new technology trials in India, including a vehicle-to-grid demonstration project, which we just started. We'll be commissioning that with 2G sometime end of June or early July. So with this initial words, I leave it to Anand to take you through, and Glenn for the first half, and second half we will have Mani and Rahul Tonkia.
Welcome, sir. Thank you, sir. Today's master class, we are discussing on energy transition to net zero, key stakeholders and their roles, current states, the future states, the new technology, case studies, and examples. We would like to invite Mr. Glenn to give his remark and presentation.
Vivek, I'm going first.
Okay. Sorry, I would like to Mr. Anand sir
The flow.
to start this.
Yeah. Get the computer
Yeah.
equipped. Sorry, Glenn. No worries. We talked, but we didn't. It reminds me of an example where somebody sent me a job offer. I was supposed to start on March 1st. They were expecting me to show up on March 1st. They had told the entire company that I'm coming on board. They had told the entire staff, everybody was ready.
Over to you, sir.
Thank you. There was only one person they didn't tell to show up on March 1st. Guess who that is? So on March 1st, I get a phone call. I was supposed to be there at 8 o'clock in the morning. At 8:30, I get thank you, Vivek. At 8:30, I get a phone call, and the phone call says, how come you're not here? I said, I had no idea. And then the whole staff is here, the leadership is here, the team is here. How come you're not here? I said, nobody told me. Then HR scrambling to go through all the emails. There's only one person that they forgot. So like that, Glenn and I had a discussion on how we should flow, but we forgot to tell Vivek. So Vivek, it's not your fault. So, okay. Look, this is one of the, thank you so much. First of all, I want to thank you so much. I want to thank Mr. Reggie Pillai and the India Smart Grid Forum for giving us this opportunity. This is a venture that we started, as Reggie sir mentioned, a few years ago. And my thought process was that this should be an opportunity to not just for someone to come and talk nonstop for hours, right? Because this, as in say in Hindi, gyan dena, right? There is plenty of information on Google. Just Google it up and you get all the answers, right? That's not what I'm here for. I'm not here to show you about 35 PowerPoints, put you to sleep, give you a bunch of statistics, right? And leave. Because to me, that would be a fruitless exercise. I'm sure you will still pick up some information, but to us and to Glenn and I personally, and we've done this before together in different venues, the value in this is for us to understand better the Indian context. And there are some people here, folks here who know the Indian context extremely well. After Mr. Pillai finished, I said to myself, if I was a smart man, I should just leave right now because this is the best I'm going to look, right? But the fact of the matter is we have committed to this course and we're going to do this course. So I'd like to begin where I always begin in every course. I would like to get to know you and understand what each of you do and what one or two things that you may want to get out of this course. Because at the end of the day, this is for you. This is for bringing together thoughts and minds, thinking. Because the fact of the matter is, as Reggie sir correctly said, if something had been done before, then you can replicate it. What we're talking about here, the energy transition to net zero, it's never been done before, not even close, and don't ever believe any vendor or anybody who comes to you and says, we can do it. Because simply, they're bluffing. Because if I told you I can do this for you perfectly, I should walk out the door right now because somebody will catch me and beat me up because it's not been done before. Different bits and pieces have been tried before, but that whole ecosystem of net zero has never been accomplished before. So with that, Vivek, if you would please pass the mic to everybody. And each of you, at least, introduce yourself, say just your name, your background, or where you come from, what you do, and really what you want to get out, one or two things that you want to hear from us and you want to discuss in this course, right? So we can focus on those. Please go ahead, Vivek. You can start right there.
Hi, my name is Priyam Awasthi. I'm from CSEF. I'm working as a research analyst. So I'm working on the power system basically, the distribution company side. So we are working on power purchase agreements. And I guess I want to know more about how this transition will affect the revenues of the distribution companies, because in India, as you know, the situation, the financial situation of distribution companies are really bad. And with more number of renewables getting into the system, how it will affect the power purchasing of these distribution companies and the revenues of these distribution companies. Thank you.
No, that's a good question, right? Because especially when you start having power purchase agreement for solar and things of that sort, how is that going to impact your bottom line? That's a good point. Please.
So hi, I'm Mukesh Wadhwa. I represent General Electric.
Oh, Mukesh ji, welcome.
Hi,
I've
sir.
heard a lot about you. So.
Yeah, thank you. So I've been working for General Electric for last 23 years. So it's been a journey in multiple roles. So what I'm here for, I mean, since you said this is the first and thanks, so I was thinking, what do I get? I really want to know. I'm blank. Okay. So I want to know, will it happen? That's it. Will net zero happen to the bottom, from top to bottom? That's what I want to know. I want to learn, and I want to go as it. Yes. The answer I need is yes, it will happen. That's what is my wish. Thank you.
And what do you do for Mukesh, for GE?
So I take care of their software digital business, electrification softwares.
You're running the software business.
I'm running the whole of the software business in South Asia, whole of the South Asia and multiple countries.
So the first time you did the pilot 10, 15, 12 years ago at Tata Power,
Yes.
I was there.
Yeah, I know.
So I started my career in GE as a
know.
small world engineer.
I know you, and I know you very well. Kind of that. I know. That's it. Yeah.
So anyhow, good to
Yeah.
see you. Good to talk to you. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. Myself, Vinay Kumar Tripathi. I belong to UP Power Transmission, working as executive engineer in transmission field presently. My present interest is I'm basically looking for O&M and construction of the transmission substations, their integration with the grid. Basically, coming to this place is I'm looking forward to getting certain experiences of the things which already might have been done in outside country also, and some of the areas of our country itself. What are the planning actually we are going ahead for the net zero, and what are the challenges which we are foreseeing, and what are the plans we should make for smart utility, basically as I'm involved with the transmission field. So already we are getting lot of newer technologies from different vendors. So we have to understand what is basically going to suit best to our requirement. As you already told that Indian context, we have to understand the things. In fact, I have been to some tours to Europe also regarding their experiences of solar and wind integrations, and there has been certain challenges they faced. So I hope that our country will be prepared not to have that kind of bad experiences. Also, as far as the your pump storage and other backups for the solar integration, that is, we understand that there is a variation in the generation because of certain natural and other things. So what are the preparations actually we should make, and what capacity we should have in the transmission, because it is a bridge between the generation as well as the distribution as well. So this is what I want to understand, what we should plan in our utility, as well as what are the modern technologies which are coming up, and how the vendors are working, their R&Ds, etc. So thank you, sir, for I think we are waiting.
Thank you.
Inputs from you.
Thank you.
A very good morning to everyone here. I am Saroj Chelluri. Basically, I had served NTPC as a business unit head. After retirement, I have several caps I've won. I'm working as a director in at Garuda UAV. We are a drone company. I'm in drone services and drone manufacturing. I'm also working for the Center for Energy, Environment and People at Jaipur, SEEP. And also I'm working with NTPC, I'm working on the net zero technologies, basically the hydrogen, the methanol technology. So my take from this is basically I will be presenting a paper also here. And my take from this session is like, I'm totally confused of the energy transition pathways. So, if I look at the hydrogen economy, I mean, I feel, still, the inputs are not sufficient to understand what exactly the energy transition pathway our country is going to take. Like, we are into hydrogen economy, we are into methanol economy, we are into EVs also. So, I mean, because again, the lithium battery systems, the more I read, the more I go into deep dive into the energy transitions, I am, more confused. So I am looking for answers everywhere. So this is one of the sessions which I would love to attend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Abel Dide Taylor, Director General for the Association of Power Utility of Africa. I have 41-year experience in the power sector. I work 25 years for power utility in my country. And now I'm the association for the last 15 years, running the Power Utility Association of Africa. Just to demystify one figure that you heard, 600 million people don't have access to electricity, but in Africa. But it was 600 million out of 1 billion, 600 million out of 1 billion 2, and 508 million, 80 million out of 1 billion 3. It means that the growth of population versus the access to electricity are competing. So yes, this figure is the same, but it's out of a number who is going up. So Africa average now 60%. The target is to have universal access in the coming 15 years. How that can be done? Energy transition versus energy access. Energy transition and capacity, because you may know that many African countries are having, again, load shedding. Capacity, energy security, power shortage, how are we combining the pathway to net zero where people are waiting to have access to energy? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning. I am Bárbara. I'm from Brazil. I work in the Universidade Estadual Campinas, São Paulo, and coordinate the one center of studies for transition energy, working in the decarbonization in agricultural process. I participate in this master class, which is very important for our in Brazil.
Welcome. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Uma Shankar. I used to head the power ministry about 10 years ago. Never heard of net zero at that time. In fact, that was a time when the target was to look at achieving more and more of coal-fired thermal plants. In fact, the few years I spent in the Ministry of Power, Government of India as its secretary, we did about 20,000 megawatts per year. And that was target greatly met. Now, after all these years, when I suddenly look at net zero, I wonder why did I do that? So we are looking at, I've never heard of this net zero before. And typically, like the Hindu tradition, when you come to a master class, you're here to only listen and learn from the master. So I'm here to learn from the master. So I want to understand what is this net zero, how can it be done? And again, a very interesting thing was mentioned by the first person who was telling us who he is. This is about the importance of distribution companies while meeting something like this. So far, India has been looking at increasing the renewable energy. By 2030, we're expected to do about 500 gigawatts, and that is also going to help us a lot in doing this and reducing the carbon emissions and so on. So my idea would be to simply sit and listen and understand what needs to be done and what will be the difficulties that distribution companies will face. Again, the point that he had raised was about the financial weakness of a lot of distribution companies. This also used to be an issue in, say, 10 years ago when I was the secretary, and I did a lot of work to try to improve their health. How much they have improved and all that is now to be seen. So the basic idea, I would say, would be to listen to the master and ask him how a distribution company is going to do all this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello everyone. I'm Anjali from Jewelwise. I work as a data analyst there. Since I'm very new to this industry, I'm totally blank about it. So I wish to learn about this industry more, and that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, good morning. My name is Hairul Hudaya. I am a professor at Department of Electrical Engineering, University of Indonesia. So my task is actually to create future leaders in power system. Of course, we have to talk to them what's happening now in the industry, and we would like to hear from you, from the master, regarding this energy transition, and of course this would be shared to the students. But sometimes we are a little bit confusing about what is net zero, because maybe net zero emission, yeah, it should be emission over there. So our country also, we have some planning right now to achieve that net zero emission. Reggie mentioned about some country 2070 target. Our country is 2060 in Indonesia, and we have also some planning to make the net zero emission, especially for the power system. So I would like to hear from your perspective, especially from industry, and would like to love to share the story to our future engineers and the students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, good morning. I'm Hari. I'm from Indonesia. I retired from State Electricity Company after 30 years of service. Now I'm a board of expert in Indonesian Electrical Power Society. I was involved in the discussion of the Indonesian National Energy Policy to achieve net zero emission on 2060. When I involved in the discussion, I experienced that net zero emission involved in Indonesia involved the Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Finance, and Ministry of Environment, and other department as well, and also the State Electricity Company and also the oil company, and each of them has their own plans and pathways to achieve the net zero emissions. So this myriad of plan and strategy needs some streamlining, and then in the discussion on the Indonesian National Energy Policy, we realized that it is a big problem to streamline of this ministry and institution of the country, and also the state-owned companies, to achieve the same objective of net zero emission 2060. So I'm here to learn experience from other countries how this be done. Or this, I think nobody has done it before, so I think we can share the experience of each of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning, Masters. Good morning, everyone. I'm Andi Makulau from Institute Technology of PLN, Jakarta, Indonesia.
Jakarta.
Yes. I'm a lecturer and also a researcher in smart grid and also in energy transition. Here today, I want to know about more about the energy transitions and also net zero emission because my research also I'm a PhD student also in Hasanuddin University, so I want to get more information about that, and also I think we hope that we can have a more for our class materials and others. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I am Deep Saxena from L&T, Digital Energy Solution, and I am handling the industrial automation and digitalization. For me, this energy transition in industries, basically from the fossil fuel, as well as the circular economy means the sustainability basically, that is important, means important topics on which I will be interested. And there are some queries that I will discuss among when the topics comes. Yeah.
Hello, hi. Good morning, everyone. My name is Digvijay Sandhu. I work with GSMA. It's an industry association of mobile network operators globally.
Repeat that again. What network operators?
Mobile network operators.
Mobile. Okay.
The department which I work in, the Mobile for Development Department, we fund startups in digital utility services. The idea here is to learn more about how startups and innovations can lead the net zero pathways in one way or the other. And what would be interesting is also to understand the balance between net zero pathways and energy security globally. Yeah. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dusan Baek, and I'm from Hyundai Motor Group, headquartered in Korea. I think I'm the first person who is from the other side of industry. Actually, as you know, we are preparing to roll out several kind of EVs in Indian market, including Hyundai Motors and also from Kia. As we are preparing to provide this kind of electric vehicles, we wanted to know that how our EVs, when the AV penetration getting higher, what will be done and what should we do, as our EVs take and consume so many energies and electricities for the future. So I think I just anticipate there will be some crash from the generation to consumption. So I wanted to know what will be done, and then at that era, what should we do for our EV owners? How can we make them much happier than current situation? Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Shinsu Lee. I'm also from Hyundai Motor Group, like my colleague. And as my colleague Tusan just said before, we got interested in how to reduce the total cost of ownership of our AV users. And we got interested in several green energy-related policy and regulatory drive that is happening actively in India, including like Green Corridor and several other distribution-related policies. So we thought we could take in-depth insight from the current situation happening very rapidly in India, and we are looking forward to gaining in-depth knowledge and insights from this conference. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Chitra Meena. I am from Tata Power Trading. Basically, I'm looking after the commercial aspects of the power trading business there. So I just wanted to understand, like, how will we achieve this net zero? And secondly, like, how will it be impacting our business in future? So that's.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, good morning everybody. Myself Madhukar Rane. I am working as a divisional engineer, power management department in BST undertaking. My interest is that how we can achieve the net zero power system with a reliable and cheaper power supply to the consumers. Because being a island city, it is not possible for us to generate in the our power area.
Where are you from again? I couldn't hear clearly.
We are from BST undertaking, Mumbai.
Mumbai.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning, all. Myself, Shivdas Pulpagare from BST Undertaking. I'm Deputy Chief Engineer, Distribution South, and looking after the distribution network in Mumbai City. I'm here to learn the new things in the industry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Waka Diomerci. I come from to DRC, National Electricité.
There's some noise there. Please clear that anyway.
I am engineering responsible for material management.
And where are you from again, sir?
DRC. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nathan Gwangu. I work like Chief of Planning from the National Society of Electricity to the DRC. Thank you.
Thank you.
Morning, everybody. My name is Olivier Mavakala. I come from the DRC, Kinshasa. I'm head of a division counting of system in ENCOM. I represent National Society Electricity. But I come here for understand the benefits of the energy transition and near for so far. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Hriday. I am from Social Alpha, and we support startups and innovations in the entire energy value chain. And one of the reasons I am here is to understand within the entire, when we talk about net zero, all the innovations, all the startups which we support, how much reflexivity is there within the entire system to take into account whatever innovations that we are supporting, and overall, how can the entire process of supporting them and taking them from lab to market can be quickened from, let's say, from the utility or from every other aspect of power generation and taking it right to the customer. That's about from my side. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sunil Kanojia. I work as a chief manager in grid controller of India.
Where do you work?
Grid controller of India, Grid India.
Grid India.
Yes. As we know that Grid India has to manage the Indian power system and transfer the electricity with reliability, economy, and sustainability. So whatever the transition take place with net zero, Grid India will be facing the first hit. So our expectation is like what the new technology that will be cater the intermittency of renewables, like BSCS, battery storage, pump storage, and other new technology which are coming in the world. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Amit Goel. I am Vice President, Strategy and Growth for Tech Minds India Private Limited. We are a IT solution provider and with extensive knowledge and experience in the EV industry, energy and EV industry. Worked with US and European companies so far. And since the space is evolving in India big time, so we are here to understand how we can lend a helping hand to take it on a fast track and in a process help ourselves also.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. My name is Anil Sinha. I am with Central Board of Irrigation and Power. My aim here is just to understand what is the latest happening in the area of this particular topic. Just want to update myself on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. I am Pramod Kumar from BACS Rajdhani Power Limited, Delhi Discom. I'm here to understand the process, methods, and tools and techniques which we are going to adopt in future for net zero. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Anuj Gupta. I am from UPPCL, UP Discom.
UP?
Yeah.
UP.
I am here to learn new things.
Me too.
Namaskar. Firstly, thank you. I am glad and humbled to see so many people from various experience, backgrounds, and countries to come here. I am Himanshu. I head digital products for Tata Power, building them and taking some to market. In the domain of transmission distribution, we look at distribution analytics, power management, bunch of services which we call energy as a service, which is critical to net zero transition. So I'm here to actually exhibit some of those solutions to you, and hopefully when I came, I thought I'll just want to see cutting edge innovation and implement for myself. But as former secretary said, the experience that the people here bring, it's immense, and I would love to see and maybe hopefully replicate some of the things and learn from some of that experience.
And share here too, and it applies to everybody, right? If you have thoughts to share during the class, please stop and share, because this is about learning together, right? So, as I told you before in the beginning, there is no answer yet. Sorry to disappoint, but go ahead.
Thank you.
Hello everyone, this is Santosh Biswal. I have around 10 years experience in the field of embedded system and IoT, and currently I work as a team lead in a startup called Convenient Private Limited, which is based in Bangalore, India. And here I am completely blank and wanted to know about the net zero power system.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello everyone, myself Vikas Gupta. I am from Uttar Pradesh Power Corporation Limited. I am currently working in Power Purchase Agreement Unit. So as a UPPCL, I am here to learn how the new technologies, ideas and experience will let go us to achieve net zero system. We are also going to some more energy for solar pump hydro. So thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm RTV. So I'm from Hitachi Energy. So I'm here to learn about the energy transition strategies.
Okay, welcome. What do you do for Hitachi?
So I'm currently an R&D engineer working in the power system research team.
Oh, okay. So you know Alex?
Yeah.
Yeah, good, good. Alex is a good friend of mine. Yeah. Good, good.
Yeah, good morning all. This is Devesh. I am from GE Vernova, working as a regional sales manager. We are already working with several utilities across the globe to achieve their net zero objective. Major aim to attend this particular master class is to know the use of different utilities and stakeholders across the different regions and how we can achieve the net zero objective jointly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Vivek. I'm from GE Vernova, and I'm looking for more of the technical aspects, how we are going to achieve the targets or the net zero targets, how we can get benefited and how we can help utilities to achieve their targets.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Saket from PS Collective. We conduct research, policy-related research in the areas of low carbon pathways for buildings, cities, and power grid. And I'm here to connect more dots around. Thank you.
That's it, I guess? Okay. Thank you so much. So really, I heard a lot of, interesting backgrounds and experiences. I also heard certain themes. And before I start, two requests I have. I completely understand that this is a working day, and I'm also in similar situations when I go to these events and sit in these events. I get phone calls, customers call me, my boss calls me. So you will have those situations emerge. If it does, please, I ask that you take the conversation outside so everybody else is not disturbed, number one. And number two, let's limit the conversations in the room to one-on-one conversations so that everybody can hear and everybody can understand and share in that thought process. I would hate for us to have multiple conversations going on where we miss the themes. I know it's challenging because it's a very interesting topic and everybody wants to contribute. Let's try and see if we can do that together. Please mute turn off your cell phones, put them on vibrate mode, and please take conversations outside. Okay, because it's very disconcerting for other people, when we engage in telephone conversations in a room full of people where there's sessions going on. Okay, thank you. So, what I heard from folks is from a varied background is everybody. I think you, sir, began the very fundamental question: what is net zero, right? So I think we should basically settle that right now. I think that's the first fundamental concept question that I heard here. And I think net zero, that means something is adding, something is subtracting. The net has to be zero. So the question is, what is being added, what is being subtracted, right? So again, I'm not here to preach, I'm not here to argue or to dispute. I'm here to state what I think as some normally accepted things, terms and conditions. My belief is that why is climate change and global warming takes place, I don't have the answers. I leave it to the experts. But we are being told by the experts that climate change is real. I have seen personally, single-handedly, the effect climate change can do and the damage it can bring to different cities and towns and people of all kinds of backgrounds. It's not something that impacts only developing countries or developed nations. Nobody, whether it be the most developed country in the world or the most underdeveloped, is impacted equally by climate change. The second thing is, what is the cause of climate change? The conventional wisdom is that it is because of the increase in carbon content, the greenhouse gas emissions. So net zero is about trying to figure out pathways to identify what were the reasons for those carbon emissions being put into the atmosphere and in the other parts of the globe. So when you look at net zero and how is being handled in different environments and different places across the world, I think what they're doing is that they're looking at net zero at the state level. If you look at the United States, where I'm coming from, for example, if you take the example of the state of California, California is saying net zero of the economy, right? Meaning that the entire economy, I think somebody here referred to the hydrogen economy and the methanol economy and so on and so forth. The fact of the matter is that there is multiple micro economies within the larger economy. Reggie said referred to marine and the shipping industry as well, right? So to me, this concept of net zero is very complicated. It is not a very simple one shoe fits all, just a simple formula that you can plug in and get the answers. It is different for every environment, every country. It is different for every state. If I look at the 50 states across the United States, and I compare that to what's happening in Europe and what's happening in India and across the world, what I find is different jurisdictions are handling this at a slightly different pace and level with specific targets. Some of them are looking at the economy level, as I talked about in California. Some states and some jurisdictions looking at certain narrower space of utilities and transportation and so on and so forth, the different areas that impact us. And I know some of them are looking into cooking, and there's a whole range of areas being looked into. The bottom line is, what are we putting into the atmosphere and what are we taking out of the atmosphere? That concept is basically net zero. The easiest way to accomplish net zero on paper is put the least amount of carbon into the atmosphere. Common sense, right? But as someone else mentioned here, if you're running a utility and if you're trying to make money and if your utility generation profile is a combination of thermal and for firm generation base load is a combination of thermal, possibly nuclear, like in the case of EDF, or it is a combination of thermal gas and nuclear, especially a lot in the United States for gas for peaking primarily, and a lot of them are fossil fuels. It is not easy to just take that out and put renewable and multiply it 200 times and hope that it'll work, right? So to me, that is net zero. So Before I start, first of all, thank you for sharing your insights, right? So what is different, right? I mean, this is a slide that some of you may have seen before, and if you have, that's okay. The fundamental concept is, what is different about this quote-unquote economy is opposed to the previous energy economy? What is fundamentally different? To me, at least, if I look at the traditional economy, the traditional utility industry, the paradigm that we talk about, what used to happen in the past? You had base load generation, primarily centralized in certain parts of the country, right? And this is true for all of the world, right? And then you had bulk transmission, pretty much. You planned your generation using your IRPs and generation planning. You planned your generation years ahead. You put the generation in place. You made sure it works. Can you turn the lights back up, please, if you don't mind? Don't play with the lights. Let's turn the light back up a little bit. Oh, for the screen, you're saying? Okay, okay, that's fine. That's fine. So you had the bulk transmission, and then the load was primarily a fairly steady load. If I look at many jurisdictions across the world, until the smart grid era began in 2008-9 timeframe, and more recently accelerated because of the increasing electrification, the load hadn't changed a whole lot. In fact, many countries were experiencing flat peak demand, especially more of the developed countries were experiencing flat peak demand. Now, in the developing countries, as we are doing more electrification, as the gentleman here referred to, increasing access for, I think India achieved that a couple of years ago, getting access to electricity for every village, getting power. So when you're getting access to electrification, you're increasing electrification, increasing the demand and the usage, what happens is the numbers go up and your load goes up. But for the most part, the load was fairly steady. That is the traditional paradigm. So the utilities job, or whether you look at the value stream from transmission, generation, transmission, distribution to the home, wherever you had your balancing authority, which in most cases sitting right attached to the transmission. In the US, it is ISO, RTO. In different countries, there are different paradigms. Your balancing authority's goal was complex, but it was relatively less complex. Now you move to the era that we are going to and the era that we are looking at. What is the difference now? The difference is, now what's happening is, as Reggie sir talked about, the generation is changing. For the first time, we are in an era where increasingly, because of the reasons we discussed about climate change, access, and so on and so forth, cost also being an issue, the generation mix is changing. And in many jurisdictions across in the United States and other parts of the world, people are taking out the steady, firm, coal-based thermal generation. In some cases in the US, nuclear has also been taken out. So now you got to replace that with some other kind of generation. And so, but at the same time, as someone else mentioned here, generation alone is not the issue, right? You have to mix, you can generate, if you had steady generation taking place in one central spot, you had your takeaway point, you had your step-up transformer, GSU unit, and transmission goes, you're good to go. Now you start distributing the generation, guess what happens? You have to invest in transmission. Register gave a number of multiple trillions, what is that, 21 trillion or something, and there is tremendous investments taking place in transmission right now. That's the second part of the challenge. The third part of the challenge is, yes, distributed generation is taking place at renewable-based generation taking place, replacing some of the firm, steady generation, but transmission and distribution also is changing. We'll address some of that. When we talk about digitalization of the substations, we'll address some of that and talk about some of that. How is it changing, right? But then what is the other part that is changing is the load. And I think Reggie sir talked about Marines and how all these ships were fired by coal. Well, what's happening now is because of the drive and push to EVs, right? At the same time, the hydrogen economy, electrolyzers don't, also use, they're also a load of some kind, right? It's a different kind of load, but it's a load. You talk about building to grid and now grid-connected buildings. So you're converting, there are many utilities and jurisdictions converting from usage from fossil fuels to electric power. So what does that do? What that does is now your load is increasing from different angles. Heating, cooling, primarily the two energy usage in buildings, that is also increasing, shifting to electric power. And then electric vehicles is not alone. There is this big 800-pound gorilla sitting in the room that nobody is talking about at any of these conferences. Everybody talks about EVs, everybody talks about buildings, everybody talks about transportation. Anybody want to guess here what is the biggest threat and what is the biggest challenge that utilities are facing today, not just in the United States, across the world in terms of a load they're having a trouble matching and meeting today? Anybody want to take a guess? No? That's true, but not completely. Anybody want to guess? No, which type of load is to which there is a certain type of load to which utility is saying, I'm sorry, I cannot meet your demand. I cannot meet your demand of what you're trying. That is true. Just keep going. I think you're close. Data centers. You know, this is very interesting. When I landed in India a couple of days ago, I'm still a bit jet lagged, and I jumped in an Uber vehicle, and the Uber guy was playing some channel, Hindi music, my kind of music, you know. And I was listening to it, enjoying it, and every 2 seconds I was being interrupted by political ads. Typically, political ads annoy the hell out of me because I know how I'm going to vote. I don't need help, right? But this political ad got me really thinking. This is talking about digitization. I heard about Digi-Yatra at the airports, just like what I saw in Changi a few years ago. You just walk in, show the picture, and you're in, right? The Prime Minister of the country is educating the people, and I find it very unique because no politician anywhere in the country educates people. Because the politician's job is to not educate, okay? I'm sorry to say this, but I probably shouldn't be on record saying this, but here, the ad is educating the common man about digitalization. So what are we essentially happening here? What's essentially happening here? This connected enterprise, this connected home, the connected devices that we have, all these devices that I carry, right? My phone, iPad, this, that, and the other. This connected enterprise concept impacting not just me personally as an end user, but all my data has to go somewhere. Then you talk about all the industries that are having the same philosophy whether it be healthcare industry or the credit card and finance industry, hospitality industry, and on and on and on it goes. So what is happening essentially is the demand for data is increasing in leaps and bounds. Today, there are utilities that are telling their data center customers, we cannot meet your demand. Because the growth is projected in multiple trillions of hundreds of gigawatts. And the utility says, I'm sorry, I cannot meet your demand. And you refer to electric vehicles and transportation. What is the challenge in transportation? The challenge in transportation is transportation authorities have been told to go electrify. The Transportation Authority does their business case, cost-benefit analysis, does their roadmap, and I've worked with them on quite a few of those. They put together their strategy, they put together the roadmap, their architecture, and their demands, take it to the local utility, and guess what the local utility says? We can't meet your demand. So guess what the Transportation Authority is doing? Instead of taking, for example, one transit that I'm not going to name in public because I'm working with them under NDA, 600 vehicles, 600 buses in the west part of the United States, they have to electrify that. The local utility says, I'm sorry, we cannot meet this thing. We may be able to meet this in 5 years or 7 years, but not now. So what are they doing right now? They have come up with the all of the above strategy to meet net zero. How are they doing it? Very simple. They are taking the 600 buses. They know they cannot electrify all the buses. So they put about 30 to 40 buses, and there were 6 or 7, the highest level charging capability they have put, charges from a couple of companies. They did that. Then they came up with the fuel cell concept, right? From one of the major companies, Bloom Energy, that you may have heard about, the fuel energy supply. So they put the fuel energy complex, that meets some part of the demand. And then that charges maybe about 50 to 80 buses, 60 buses, 80 buses. And then they're slowly expanding. They're looking at hydrogen. They're looking at every other possibility as they slowly, in parallel, and now they're looking at microgrids to be able to challenge and charge their buses. So what I'm saying is that as we look at net zero, let's open up our minds and think about, not just think purely about how can we go to net zero. What we have to think about today is, do we have what it takes in our economy today to be able to go to net zero in a sustainable way, right? Anyhow, so that is kind of the thoughts that I wanted to share as a response to some of the comments that were made here, because it's very relevant, right? You can put any kind of mandates on anybody, and they did. They put the mandate on this transit company. This is not the only transit company, by the way. hundreds of transit companies. So what are data centers doing right now? And I'm working with multiple data center companies at their C level, looking at strategies. What are they doing right now? You want to guess what they're thinking about? They have not done anything yet, but they are seriously contemplating firm generation. Because can they put BESS? Yeah. But does the best business case work out? I've got some slides. I'll show you how the best business case works out. Not reliable, not exact. They don't want to multiply their cost 5 times. Someone mentioned about energy as a service. The oldest energy as a service model is there for a long time, and Glenn works for that company. Pico, that is energy as a service. It's a utility. UP, there are so many other, Tata Power. You are doing energy as a service for the longest period of time. You provide energy and power for a bunch of other services in exchange for a certain SLA, service level agreement, right? And so I can also do energy as a service, but am I going to be cost effective the way a utility is at the scale that they're doing at? Probably not. So data centers are putting their minds together, not just the hyperscalers, but the co-location data centers. And the amazing thing is, this problem hasn't hit India yet. Very honestly, we're already struggling with this right now. You know why? Because most of the current load of data centers is in US, right? And in some of the Western countries. Now, digital realty is coming to India. NTT is coming to India. 1.434 billion people, all their data and all the corporations' data together. You can only imagine the amount of space, amount of buildings, and the amount of power you will need. And that has to be net zero. Anyhow, so the critical link, this is the point I was trying to make, is that the critical link between this energy demand that is soaring and the climate change. In fact, one of those pictures is Delhi, I think, but I'm not going to just blame Delhi for it. You come to Western United States, people are dying because they can't breathe because of the wildfires, across California and Oregon and some of the other Western states. In fact, Colorado, the state I live in, we had tremendous amounts of wildfires. And the wildfires, fine, the utility gets blamed for it, but at the end of the day, it's also mostly climate change impact. So the world needs to concentrate on, so here is some of the leading sources of energy per country. And I'm also going to go through a specific example of a utility that I've worked with and I'm working with right now. How are they handling this net zero energy transition, right? So, here again, the coal, Asia Pacific having the largest share of coal generation. And in fact, someone mentioned about putting in more coal generation. Let's face reality. You got wind, you got hydro, but the biggest, contribution Asia Pacific provides for coal, right? So, what is the energy transition is taking place, and what are the transformations that are taking place, right? First and foremost is, and we know about these things, right? This is not something that I'm telling you that you don't know, right? First and foremost is we are increasing the penetration of low carbon electric generation, right? Wind, solar, hydro, and a whole range of plethora of areas that we can discuss, right? To replace fossil fuels, right? Secondly, directly electrification of all possible final energy consumption sectors. On a case and example, I'm working with a gas company right now in the United States. I'm talking with a gas company, and the gas company vice president tells me, we have a mandate, we got to go electric. Well, he didn't exactly say that. He has a mandate to decarbonize. So when you go to a gas company that is supplying gas, and say you got to decarbonize, the message, the writing is on the wall. So how are they handling it? So one of the strategies they have put in place is, if they have a gas feeder, right, and on that gas feeder, every customer on that feeder agrees to shift to electric. That is the rule, requirement from the commission, right? Every customer on that feeder has to shift to electric. Then what they will do is they will shift that entire feeder from gas to electric, and they will transition it over, and the gas portion will go away. This is kind of how they're doing the transition for that particular gas feeder. Now, there are other techniques, and we'll talk more about some of the use cases later as to how they are doing this transition. The gas company transition, and we don't think about gas most cases. We always think about electric power, right? So electric, water, gas, all three are the major utilities, right? So the gas company transformation is even more complicated for us than electric company transformation. Complement with indirect electrification via clean feedstock. There's something we will talk about more. Developing flexible grid and energy storage for seamless integration, right? Which is essentially what some of the folks referred to here with the best comment that you made, right? So battery energy storage is another vast area. You know, part of the challenge I have in a setting like this is I have done specific courses and tutorials focused on green hydrogen, for example, at Keynes and Seagray. And the course that we did recently was focused primarily on battery energy storage and microgrids. And so covering such a vast span of all these enabling technologies in one short session is very challenging. And it's very overwhelming. But we're going to try to do what we can do and do the best we can. Then my favorite area, I became a certified energy manager in 1990s. I have done a lot of energy management projects, continuous commissioning projects. I looked at a day and age when cost of power in my home state was 3 cents a kilowatt hour, which is practically nothing, right? I was breaking my head against the wall trying to find the low-hanging fruit with industrials, working with the key account manager of utilities. Luckily for me, the United States passed the Energy Policy Act, welcome Rahul, the Energy Policy Act of 2005, and as part of that set up an industrial training program with the Department of Energy. And what I was able to do with the Department of Energy is go around and do energy audits. The DOE and I worked together to design a whole set of energy audits, methodologies, to calculate the building envelopes and things of that sort. And so as we did these energy audits across the nation, across a lot of the leading industry verticals, we were able to identify what is a low-hanging fruit. And then, primarily heating and cooling. And of course, motors is roughly 30% of the electric load, right? So that's kind of how you look at it, and you look at it from that perspective. The Energy Policy Act of 2005 also helped pay for funding for these energy audits and some of the follow-up energy efficiency measures. To me, again, energy efficiency is a full 8-hour course that I teach because it's very near and dear to my heart. Energy efficiency to me is the fundamental starting block in the loading order, so to speak, right? After energy efficiency comes the demand response and the engagement with the grid, right? Glenn and I have taught so many courses on demand response together, right? Where you're responding to a signal from the utility to shut down and control your processes so as to get some benefit and some value in exchange. And then after demand response, the next loading order is the distributed energy resources. And so working with the Grid-Wise Architecture Council, myself and a whole bunch of colleagues of mine worked on different possible business models and architectures on how the DR-DER interaction along with generation can be used to optimize the energy mix, so to speak. How can you leverage, because to me, all of these elements of energy efficiency, renewables, demand response, battery energy storage, I consider these to be levers. So which lever you want to use under which situation is basically very similar to how a mini microgrid works, right? In a microgrid, you have, in a closed area and a boundary, you have loads and you have generation. And you optimize based on availability. If the grid goes away, you island it and you manage internally. The minute the grid comes back, you synchronize back to the grid. That is the way that we have to think about energy transition as a whole, because these levers have to be used to balance and to mitigate the problem. And then, of course, the carbon capture, utilization, and storage technologies and different kinds of storage. Pump storage, which is very predominantly implemented in different parts of the world. Hydro pump storage, flywheel storage, energy, heat storage. Of course, battery energy storage we'll talk about as well, right? So the shift to renewable energy, really, this is a COP28. I think we were talking about COP28 yesterday. I think our good friend Richard Schomburg was talking about a group that has been formed of utilities, right? Which is so important because as I look at the previous versions of the COP and the previous versions of this discussion of energy storage, I believe, and maybe wrongly so, that the most important player was being left out. And to me, the most important player is the utility. Right? You leave the utility out of this equation, you can talk about everything till the cows come home, and all the cows will come home. You will not solve that problem, right? And so, without really going into every word here, essentially, as COP28, 118 governments have pledged, but most importantly, in COP28, what happened was the utilities formed an association, and now the utilities themselves are having conversations of each and every one of those topics. Now, Some of the projections is also here in terms of solar, and I know India has made great strides in the solar space, but here's on the right-hand side, you can see the graph that talks about some of the solar capacity and solar generation capacity and where it has been installed. But we still have the problem. Again, we cannot look at these in silos or in separate, uniquely different, and these are not separate, uniquely different animals. They have to be looked at in the context of the system. So you look at solar, great. You got tons of solar. Yeah, it is intermittent. Okay, fine, accepted that. But in the majority of the countries and regions, the solar peak and your system peak is not the same. So when your solar peak happens at, let's say, 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and your system peak does not happen at that time, what have you just done, right? So that is when you got to optimize, and you got to use the optimization methodologies of trying to leverage, battery energy storage, maybe use some other load for electrolyzers. You run your electrolyzers during that time when there's a solar peak. There's a ton of excess availability, so you use that. Same thing at night for wind, when wind blows, and the load is very low, right? So it's all about, that is the word, I'm going to introduce that, and GE folks have already done that. It's called orchestration. Right? This is the key. Orchestration is the key, right? Again, there is a course, an entire course that I teach on just orchestrating distributed energy resources. How do you integrate them, the protection, control, automation, and the orchestration of these distributed energy resources, because there's a whole art and science to that, right? Then the electrification part, right? And this part goes, I know this is a very complicated curve, but really the simplest takeaway of this curve, what we have done is we have looked at 3 or 4 major load types. We looked at industry, we looked at buildings, we have looked at transportation, and our Hitachi Energy research folks have done this analysis, and I give them the credit for it because there's a lot of data in here to analyze, and they have looked at this and they have looked at and analyzed this. What they essentially found is on the left-hand side of this graph, you can see there's coal, nuclear, hydro, wind, solar, natural gas, and of course there's combustion turbines, the CT, and then there's also combined cycle. All those factors have been considered. And essentially, what we are showing is the current state is in 22. This is a slightly dated, but it's still 22. And how is it going to look at 2050, right? In 2022 versus 2050. And if you see what's happening here is, as you can see, the transition is the usage patterns and the contribution patterns. If you see by 2050, coal was on the top in 2022. Right? And if you see in the 2050 graph, coal goes to the very bottom, right? And so this is kind of a paradigm shift of how we expect the electrification to change, and then of course, we have to look at what will be the impact of that to the different utilities as well as the industrials, right? Because it's got both sides impact, right? So now here's, someone mentioned about EVs, and I thought this is something, this is very interesting, right? So this is some research that we did. So let's look at green hydrogen. So this course that I taught on green hydrogen in Seagray, what we did was we looked at the entire green hydrogen value cycle, right? The example that I gave about Bloom Energy fuel cell, the hydrogen was not green hydrogen, the hydrogen used was gray hydrogen, right? And I won't go into all the descriptions of green, blue, pink, whatever, you guys can look it up, but the bottom line is that is not green hydrogen. That's the takeaway, right? Now, if you look at the green hydrogen, right, technologies, and if you look at the last one at the bottom, I'm going to start with that, right? So let's assume for a second that you're going to now position green hydrogen. The first thing I'm working on, I've submitted a paper that got approved for Seagray Session Paris, where myself and a couple of colleagues worked on what is green hydrogen certification, because we have to get the certification right. Why? Because if you do not get the certification right, it's very difficult to trade and be consistent across different jurisdictions, right? So green hydrogen certification we looked at from different angles, and one of the areas for green hydrogen certification we looked at was that production of hydrogen, the geographic, the temporal, and the electrical. Why is that important? Because the position of the green hydrogen electrolyzer, where are you going to locate that electrolyzer? I had a guy from Texas, and folks in Texas, I don't know if anybody here is from Texas, no, hopefully not, but I can say this, Glenn, don't get me in trouble, but in Texas, they like to do it their own way. right? The Texas grid is disconnected to a great extent, right? Texans like to do things their own way. So the guy in Texas came to me and said, I'm going to put a green hydrogen electrolyzer in the middle of Texas. And I asked him, who's going to supply you? How are you going to take away that power? What are you going to do? Where are you going to get the power from to run your electrolyzer? And he goes, oh, I'll have to figure that out later. Well, once I put it in, the utility will come and give me a connection. I said, you may want to go check that first. He was in the Encore territory, and the VP of Encore is a good friend of ours. He laughed. When I told him the story, he just absolutely exploded in laughter. He couldn't tell me more because of NDAs. But green hydrogen, the location, the electrical, geographical, and temporal. Why is geographically, why is it important? Imagine for a moment that you're locating a green hydrogen electrolyzer in Spain. Simple case, right? Now, what happens in the winter? Let's take one example of a winter day in Europe, right? Guess what? Your solar in Germany gets covered, so you get very little solar contribution in Germany. So now what you have to do is you got to ship solar from Spain over to Germany. What happens on that day? It's raining in Spain. What are you going to do? You fire up your green hydrogen electrolyzers, and then you do your intertrade and transmission trade, and the power goes to other parts of the country, of Europe. Same thing true in US. So electrical, geographical, and temporal. All three are very important for certification. There are other elements of green hydrogen certification, including the labeling and how you track and trace the origin of hydrogen and how it just basically comes to your end user. Because without that entire process value chain being transparent, it's very difficult to label it as green hydrogen. So in case of green hydrogen, you look at the low carbon generator. Let's assume for a second that your electrolyzer is being fed by 100% renewable. That's how it is green, right? Then you go to the low carbon generation, hydrogen, the renewable generation is, assume for a second, it is 100% efficient. Then you go into the electrolyzer. The electrolyzer at best is about 60% efficient. Then if your consumption point is a generation point, which is another idea to think about, because very often in the traditional realm of electric power, we do not think of the consumption point being at the generation point, right? Generation point and consumption points are not the same. So in this example, we are assuming that the consumption point is farther away and there is a value chain there, which means now you can't just take the green hydrogen at production point and consume it. Ideally, that'll be great, but it's not practically possible every time. So what you do is you are now going to go through some level of storage and some level of compression. There is some loss of energy there. And then you're doing either a pipeline or a truck. And there's another area that I'm working on with a few gas companies. They're looking at decarbonization. The second, I mentioned earlier about one way of decarbonization of the gas company is you take out their entire feeder and you replace it with electric power. What's the second way of decarbonization in the gas companies are looking at? They're actively looking at possibility of using non-fossil fuels, including green hydrogen, as a possible medium to be sent. The problem is, research has been proven to us that, and they have done the research, they have proven that the existing pipeline that they have for gasoline, for gases, you cannot put hydrogen in that pipeline because hydrogen molecules are too small, right? And so they had some other effects. There's some cooling and other things you have to take care of, temperature control and all those things. It is not the same, right? But bottom line, if you accomplish the task, you're losing some efficiency for every 100 kilometers, you're losing 1%. Then you go to, at the delivery point, you have a pump, and then last but not the least, you're going to the energy into the wheels. And so finally it comes out, your efficiency is, system efficiency, round trip efficiency is 20%, right? Now, the good news is, I don't know if it's good news, but the good news is that combustion engines are not the most efficient electric transportation option either, because they're only at about roughly 37%. The highest, most efficient combustion engine is about 37%. The problem is, if you compare hydrogen with combustion engines, look at the cost differential. Not just the efficiency part, but also the cost differential. Look at the investment that it's going to take across the value chain from generation all the way to consumption. And every aspect of that value chain has to be either built or put in place or enhanced or upgraded, right? The middle part is the battery energy storage option. And that is at a very high efficiency level. There is low carbon generation, electric power, T&D grid, which is fairly highly efficient. and then finally you go to the charger, and then from the charger you go to the battery energy storage vehicle. Here you're at about 72%, right? Same thing on the fuel efficiency in the space heating section. We have compared 3 options, right? We have compared the gas well, the gas option, we've compared the low carbon generation, electric power to the home, the heat pump option, and the boiler option, right? So this should give you some perspective on why this net zero process, the net zero calculation thinking process is so complicated, right? Because there's a lot of options, but each and every option has got its pros and it's got its cons. And then on top of all these things, and we have not even touched the tip of the iceberg yet, how is it going to affect, and we'll come to that in a minute when I go to the case study, affect the value chain of the utility from a perspective of planning, operations? How is it going to impact that? Because at the end of the day, the utility planners and the utility operators are going to be very closely involved in this net zero transition. If they're not involved in this net zero transition, you're not going to have a net zero transition. So I'll talk about this. I'm going to give these slides to you guys. I won't be covering every slide in the interest of time. And here again are some historical numbers. You can look at it at your own spare time. But essentially, we're showing numbers across from different sources like IEA and things of that sort. So I'll skip these slides. And then we go about carbon emissions by sector. Again, these are all IEA numbers, pretty well known. And then here's where I come to. And to me, this is the kind of I call it the holy grail in many ways. Because I've always believed that when you talk about net zero, and this is why I love the discussions of net zero when I have it with utilities especially, and with non-utility companies like oil and gas companies, my data center company my friends in the transportation sector. Because this is not a one shoe fits all. We've talked about that. This is also not a single formula, so to speak, but this is a collaborative exercise. So there's been meetings where I bring in multiple stakeholders from these different perspectives, right? And so here's an example of the different, different. And again, I talked about the main sources of energy, sources of heating and cooling, right, being the major contributors, right? So here he's talking about less than 100 degrees, the 100 to 400 degrees applications in the different verticals, 400 to 1,000, and then over 1,000. Right? And how these different technologies will be primarily used. Now, the assumption that this particular slide makes is you talk about iron and steel. I grew up in the city of Rourkela. I know blast furnaces very well. I've seen that thing hundreds of times, literally, right? Every time I go through there, I see the blast furnace. The coke ovens, right, which were installed in Rourkela in 1957. I don't know if they're still functioning it or not. And so the steel industry, then the other heavy industry being the oil and gas industry, especially where hydrogen is used for the process. And then the cement industry, the clinker burning in the kilns and stuff like that. And of course, pulp and paper and things of that sort. Why is it important to look at it from this angle? Because the usage of we talked about the supply and the load, right? This is all the load aspect of net zero. How are the different processes in the end user of the utilities customer, so to speak? How are they looking at net zero, and how are they, what kind of net zero and sustainability measures have they put in place, the sustainability 1, 2, 3 measures have they put in place so as to improve their processes? They're not just tinkering on the surface anymore. If you talk to senior leaders of iron and steel industry, the chemical industry, the oil and gas industry, data centers I talked about, the transportation industry, they're not where they were in the 90s and the 2000s looking at energy efficiency, taking out bulbs and taking out, replacing them with more efficient bulbs and more efficient HVAC systems. They've gone well past that. They're looking at process improvement efficiencies. And these process efficiencies are very critical to be put in place so as to marry with what the utility and the supply side is doing so as to bring about that net zero equation. If you do not touch the load side at all, the end user side, you can only do so much on the supply side. And then what also happens on top of that is the supply side activity will become, the utilities will be under so much pressure. They already are under pressure. They'll be under so much pressure to compensate for all the inefficiencies on the end user side that this equation will literally become a nightmare from a practical implementation perspective and an accomplishment and an outcome perspective, right? So I'm going to skip on some of these. I covered it at a very high level. I'm not going to go into details about the intricate technologies of blast furnaces and electric arc furnaces and different thermal storage technologies and so on and so forth. The bottom line takeaway is that the energy transition to net zero cannot happen without the load side, the end users also looking at how they can improve their processes and become sustainable and reduce the carbon footprint on their side. So this is a point that Reggie sir was talking about, transmission, how much transmission is needed for energy transition, right? And this is an area, and I think I've got one, Ravi just walked in, and I would very much like to get his perspective. Ravi is one of our veterans at ISGF and also with a lot of experience, both from India and from Hydro One. This is kind of the question. This is like more of a question I like to ask utilities, right? If you are going to take a traditional paradigm of generation, bulk transmission, distribution, in the net zero concept, the net zero paradigm, I'm not so sure, looking at it from I'm going to go invest millions of dollars in transmission to make it happen, I'm not so sure if that is an equivalent good strategy. Why? Because the whole paradigm change to me is about bringing generation closer to the load and vice versa, right? And what is the benefit of that? You can defer and eliminate possibly transmission investments, because bulk transmission investments, as Reggie sir mentioned, is not cheap. It's not something you can plan and accomplish in a day, right? Distribution investments are not cheap either, but transmission investments are definitely not cheap. And then there's a whole lot of processes that go in place in identifying and executing bulk transmission investment. Anyone who has done bulk transmission planning will know how much effort it takes to get this done, right? And then there's, of course, the whole issue of how many people want a transmission line going in their backyard. Not everybody, right? So in the net zero paradigm, I really would challenge that you have to disrupt, and one of the ways of disrupting is by moving the generation closer to the loads, or at least as close to the load as possible, and eliminating those huge bulk transmission investments from being made. If you do not do that, and if you purely replicate net zero with the hope that doing the same thing over and over again with a different result, I think the equation will fail, because we will never be able to, even advanced countries, I think the US, I was talking to one of the DOE folks when I met with them last week, they're looking at trillions of transmission investments. They don't have the money for it. They don't have the approvals for it. And they doubt if they will ever get the approval for it. It's not going to happen. So, planning and operations of the grid. So, let's talk about this. So one of the things that I like to talk about is, we talked about what is what is net zero. We defined net zero. We talked about what is really needed to get to net zero, right, in terms from a planning, from a generation perspective. We looked at it from the load perspective, and now we will talk about from a power system environment perspective, right? So, on the left-hand side is in a classic utility language, so to speak, I use the three words, right? Blue sky, gray sky, dark sky, right? Blue sky meaning normal operating conditions, normal day. Gray sky meaning some clouds and maybe some mild disturbances. And then the dark sky meaning this classic storm conditions, right? So this graph clearly shows one of the main reasons why when the CEO of one of the major data centers approached Dominion Electric Power or some of the other electric companies in US and said, we need so many gigawatts of power, when can you start? We can break ground tomorrow morning and we can get the data center up and running in two years. The CEO of Dominion said, whoa, wait. You may want it in 2 years, but we don't operate in months, in years. We operate in decades, right? Because that is literally how the scale of resolution perspective happens, right? So here, the planning of new capacity, system design and operations, right? It takes years. Now, granted, utilities have changed the paradigm. Increasingly, utilities have short cycles. They have shortened the cycle for this. But we are still not in a day and age where we can do this and get it up and running in a matter of months. We're not there yet. Then forecasting of the system days, that goes from months to minutes. The markets, anybody who has worked in energy markets, right? The whole day ahead market, the whole capacity market, the energy market, capacity market, and capacity market you have the day ahead, the contracts in place. You got the day ahead market, and finally the day off, right? And then of course the whole disturbance, the energy imbalance market.
They also run on bilaterals and PPAs.
Thank you. But still, the point I'm making is that whether you have markets or not, the time resolution, right, is that to get something done, right, if you don't have the investments in place and the planning in place to generate, how are you going to do, whether you have markets or how are you going to supply to the load, right? And last but not the least, the system operations that goes anywhere from a week all the way to seconds and milliseconds. On the right-hand side, I talked about the disturbance conditions, right? Black start and restoration, the emergency control, and last but not the least, protection and automation, right? I'm a protection engineer, basically, right? So I don't operate in hours and days and months. I operate in subcycles, right? So the purpose of this slide is essentially to showcase that the power system environment as it stands today is very different. And in the net zero paradigm, where you're going to ideally have renewables in the generation side, where renewables intermittency can vary very fast, and they will during the day multiple times, when the loads can vary as well. One of the challenges data centers are now talking to me about is the whole AI data center. And what is the difference between a cloud data center and an AI data center? Cloud data center, all the data goes into a cloud. Fairly stable usage. There is not a whole lot of ups and downs. Utilities love any load that is steady, right? Stable, they get the money, and they walk away with it. They can plan ahead in years, and they are fine with it. The minute you're talking about AI, you are now possibly entering a scenario where there is two parts of AI. One is the algorithmic part of the AI in terms of data crunching and creating the algorithm. And then you have the learning part of AI. And having talked to utilities, data centers, I'll tell you this. The learning part of the AI can also be shifted from data center to data center. They can shift the loads. It's also fairly steady. It's not as peaky. The initial part of the AI, when the algorithm is being created, and that initial, let's say out of 1 million data sets, the first 200,000 data sets, guess what? That is very peaky. That can, I'm not allowed to share certain facts that have been discussed under NDA, but from what I have heard in public domain knowledge, multiple peaks in like subcycles, right? So now that utility that is supplying the data center has to respond to that multiple peaks, right? And so data centers are now building gigawatt data centers, and now there's going to be multiple peaks in subcycles. Good luck with that, right? So bear in mind, utilities know of variable load, but I do not know of any variable load that exists today that peaks in subcycles. If you look at a steel mill, I grew up in a steel plant, I told you the rolling mills. When the rolling mill comes on, the load goes up. But it's not subcycle. It slowly ramps up. The slow ramp up, the slow ramp down is acceptable. The really fast ramp up and down subcycles, that becomes a huge issue, because I don't believe today's power system is either designed or does it operate that well in that kind of a variability, right? And there's something for us all as engineers and scientists to really think about, because this will change your paradigm. This will. Then operational challenges with some of the well-known issues with power systems with a high variable renewable share. You know, we have kind of covered this, but essentially what the slide is showing is the change in geographical locations, and also is showing the inverter connections. And this is something about inverters, right? So this is again from personal experience dealing with inverters. This issue is not really very well, maybe perhaps not very well known outside to all the folks here. If you take a certain West Coast utility that I will not name, the number one interconnection request that they get, you want to take a guess what that is? Anybody? Inverter-based resources generation, solar, for example, right? So they get for every, I forget the exact number, for every like 25 or 30 generation connection requests that they get like one load request, because the state that I'm referring to is not exactly the industrial belt of United States, right? Most of the industrial belt of United States is what we call the central heart of United States, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, down south, right? All the way down to Nashville and Alabama, right? That area. Now, what we have also found is, as these inverter-based resources are connecting, grid disturbances study has been done. As a matter of fact, I will distribute this to Vivek, and so you guys who sign up the course can get a copy of it. NERC has actually published a report on why these grid disturbances are taking place in some of these IPPs, inverter-based connections. Why? What's essentially happening is, if one inverter, which most likely these inverters are not load grid forming inverters, they're all grid following inverters for the most part, right? So, and I hope you know the difference between grid forming and grid following, right? So, if one inverter, let's say in an ideal situation, you should have at least one grid forming or a few grid forming and the rest could be grid following. So if one of your main grid forming inverters fails, right? Now there is a cascade failure. And there have been situations where now the grid, that is the operator, has to disconnect the generation source, because if they leave it untouched, the variability of voltages and currents and voltages is going to actually disrupt that whole paradigm. And so what they do is they isolate the generation, right? So when they isolate that generation, what happens is now you lost a certain amount chunk of your capacity, right? How are you going to make up for that capacity? So I will share that paper. As a matter of fact, I'll share that paper and the presentation that I made to one of the events in US, where we talked about, analyzed every possible disturbance and disruption, right? And then what we did was, we looked at every possible disturbance and disruption. And second, what we did was that we looked and seeing how could some of these disturbances and disruptions could be mitigated. And one of the ways is redesigning how this whole, I don't know what that is. Is that a lunch bell or something?
Not yet.
Okay. So, जब घंटी बजती तो भूख लगने लगती है भाई, क्या करें? So, घंटी तो हम सबके बजती है, right? Anyhow, so now, as I'm working with different companies, I'm finding out that they're looking at how to use grid forming inverters in combination with grid following inverters in tandem. But this is an art and a science. Why? Because the standard, the IEEE standard 1547 and the 1741, which is a test standard, right, the corresponding standard for testing, was not designed for this kind of systems. So as I'm working and talking with utility interconnection people, guess what I'm finding? Not only are they wanting to reform that, even that 1547 and the 1741 have morphed over time. 1547 has morphed from thou shall not to maybe to thou shalt, speaking of voltage fluctuations and stability and things of that sort. So the standards have morphed quite a bit. But now that's not enough. So they're now looking at IEEE 2000, and there's a whole bunch of other standards that are being looked at. And these standards are very critically important, because unless and until the inverter companies, and by the way, standards, we all know this, standards do not ensure interoperability, right? Standards do not ensure interchangeability. Just because you have two boxes for whether it be protection, control, automation, any system you have, just because both are following the same standard or compatible with the same standard, you cannot replace one system with the other and hope it will work. It works only on PowerPoint, not beyond that, right? So standards don't ensure interoperability. What standard does, it lays a roadmap and some instructions and guidance on how to ensure interoperability. The problem is, and there is a real challenge right now, because the standard influence, the influence of inverter manufacturers on the standard has been traditionally very high, to the point where there is a real tussle going on right now in the industry to morph that standard and bring it into a certain form where we can factor for these instabilities. And there is a whole paper, as I said, in the presentation I'll share. It goes into individual issues and aspects of what are the challenges and what are the failures that took place, and NERC's coming up with it. They came out with an interim report to handle this kind of grid disturbances caused by inverter-based resources, right? So this kind of, we briefly, and this is a European perspective on this. This is my friend Alex, and the team that put together some of the variable renewable shares across Europe. And this is at the hour within maximum VRS in share in Germany, and then there's also a Japan perspective as well. And of course, you'll get these slides as part of the, and then there's also different countries inside Europe, Germany, Denmark, and so on and so forth, and the annual share and how the grid is being operated in that context with these kind of inflow of renewables coming in. So that goes to the next point that I was going to cover is, so we know that net zero is about balancing what carbon that is put in the grid or in the system and the economy as a whole to what portion that is taken out. That's number one. Number two, we also know, and we have talked about, at a very high level guaranteed, about the significance and the importance of generation and the different kinds of generations and what each of these generation characteristics are. And they're all very different. We also talked about what should be looked at from a net zero perspective on the end user side, that is the utilities customer. It is so important. And the utility key account managers are going to have a very important and critical role to play from a business process perspective. For a long time, the utilities have been very siloed. And there is a market side, there is a customer side. We will talk to them when we need to. Not really, not anymore. You're going to have to involve the customer side more effectively, and importantly, that CRM system that you have in your utilities, and the customer side of the house, that has to become integrated as part of your, especially now with the increasing business processes that involved, especially with rooftop solars going on and other renewable sources that is being put out in the grid. So the other side has to become very integral part of the utility process. So we've talked about that, and we talked about some examples of that. Granted, we didn't have the time or the space to cover every industry in detail. But now I come to the next question. Yes, you got generation covered, you got load covered. Variable generation, variable load. So how do you get these things to chime together? How do you get this to orchestrate together, in the words of the GE Vernova booth from Distributech? How do you orchestrate, right? The orchestration, to me, is the key word, is a word called flexibility, right? And I'm sure that word has been thrown about a lot. It's a very confusing word and means different things to different people. I have a course that I teach on flexibility. I've got about, I go through definition of flexibility and different ways to mitigate flexibility, right? So how do you establish this flexibility? And I think to a great extent, flexibility resources, what you do and how do you make your system more flexible when you suddenly lose solar, or you lose wind, or suddenly one of your inverter-based systems fail on you and you lose an entire source, isolated. Suddenly, the AI data center begins to start number crunching the first 200,000 records, where it is ramping up and it is peaking, and not just one data center. Imagine Google, Amazon, everybody in the world, and every data center in the world peaking at the same time, right? How do you handle that? Or they're peaking continuously, and they're going back and forth. They're almost like the choppy waveform that we always hear about. How are you going to handle that? All that thing can be handled through ensuring flexibility. To me, flexibility is simple. It's about ensuring capacity at all times. That is flexibility in a nutshell, right? So the paper I wrote in Seagray that has been published, this was a group led by Gerard from Tenet, who really focused on this concept of flexibility. We looked at flexibility from the market perspective, but from a Hitachi Energy perspective, I can say that we're looking at flexibility from a 360-degree perspective, right? And so all the different responses, I'm not going to read through every item in here, but to ensure flexibility, you're going to have to very seriously consider every available resource that you may have. You talk about hydrogen and electrolyzers. You talk about battery energy storage. You talk about inertias, wheels, flywheels. You talk about every possible resource, demand response. You talk about DERs in the grid, possibly some level of microgrids, at the customer level. So you're going to have to orchestrate all these different resources in a time resolution perspective, because what may be good at millisecond level may not be the right solution at hour level or day level. You may have different flexibilities based on each flexibility resource has got its own criteria. And by the way, a lot of what I'm talking about right now is in the deck that you're going to get, right? I'm just not able to cover this entire deck word by word because if I do that, you'll be here for the next 5 days. So here are some of the challenges and solutions. And now look at this graph right here, right? So on the top, we're looking at the different parameters like cost, right? With development need, the social impact. Equity is one aspect of social impact, right? Environmental impact, system restoration, the short circuit capacity, the system inertia, grid voltage, and so on and so forth. On the columns or the rows, we're looking at different resources, right? Pumped hydro, flexible ramping units, base load sink generation, grid scale batteries, HVDC interconnections, fuel cells, demand side management, condensers, and so on and so forth. You know, if I had my druthers, this is a great graph, by the way. This has been put together very well, by essentially intercorrelating a technology with the corresponding impact. What technology is most impactful? So for example, if you look at pumped hydro, right, from a cost perspective, it's very high because hydro generation is one of the most efficient. And by the way, if you go to New England ISO, there's a ton of pump hydro resources. In fact, anybody who drives along the corridor from Bakersfield to Los Angeles will see that huge pumped hydro facility there. And there's tons of more, right? And then there is high value in terms of cost, high, low, medium, and low. And the impact is again high, medium, and low. Now, I challenge you to look at it from a slightly different angle. Put your thinking hats on, for example. What is the number one problem, to Rahul's point, in those jurisdictions where there's a developed market, right? What is the number one problem in the US right now? Anybody want to take a stab at it? There is a market. We have energy market, we have capacity market, we have ancillary services. We have all kinds of ancillary services. You name it and we have it. But there is a huge problem. You know what's the biggest problem? The biggest problem is not accessible to average persons. To participate in that market structure, and I have an entire presentation on energy market and market design, and maybe one of these days we'll do that. And Reggie has been talking about doing that, one of those courses, is that in the market design, what you'll find out is very quickly you have all these different players, right? And to participate in that market, it requires today in the US to participate in the PJM market or the New England market or the New York ISO market. I know here you're still developing the market and there's a long way to go, but still, this is something you can learn from what the mistake that has been made in the US. I wouldn't call it a mistake as much as learning curve, right? This is great, you can participate, but the problem is you gotta have a certain amount of capability to participate from a megawatt perspective. Why? It is not just that you require capacity. The settlement process, literally, I'm telling you this in a nutshell, I have a graph I can show you later. Sometimes these settlements don't take place overnight. There is an immediate snapshot of settlement, and there is a payment, but there's a settlement, some of the settlement takes up to 365 days to get paid out. You and I, if my boss comes to me and says, Anant, I'm going to employ you and your paycheck will come next year, the chances are she won't see me the next day. Maybe I'll leave the same hour, right? Most of us, poor souls, can't afford to wait 1 year for the settlement payment to come. And that is why, and I did the entire course at Seagray in the context of blockchain, and showcasing how blockchain can speed up this whole process of payment, because blockchain has got persistence, so you don't need to recalculate this 1,000 times. It persists all the data, and blockchain is immutable. You cannot just go and change it. Once you have a contract, right? That contract is in place, anybody can just not go change the contract. And this won't be public blockchain, this will be a private blockchain. And this will be not proof of work, but this will be proof of stake, right? And so essentially what you do in this process is you simplify the settlement process so you can get paid in a day or within 24 hours as opposed to getting paid months later. So if you look at this graph, to me, what this shows from a value perspective, you should also think about how will that value translate into dollars or rupees or whatever currency, whichever country you're from, quickly, equitably, and most efficiently, so that you can continue your operations as well, whichever stakeholder you are. If you are a generator, if you are a battery energy storage provider, if you are an energy as a service provider, all those the different roles and players, right? You have to get paid. If I don't get paid, I can't do it, right? And so the biggest challenge to my question earlier in the US market today, something the Indian market can learn from, don't ever do this. Don't limit access to a higher level when you design your markets, right? Design it in such a way. Implement technologies, modern technologies, enabling technologies like blockchain and others. So accessibility of the market, that is why I'm so excited about the India Smart Grid Forum work we did with UP, right? Where the regulator saw this and said, wow, this helps the DISCOM, this helps the customer, this helps every stakeholder. Let's expand that, right? And I think Delhi, Rahul, has it been done yet, or this is still a work in progress? Work in progress, right? So, to me, the biggest challenge in the US is what? When I look at this graph and say the value is great, what is the biggest challenge? Average person cannot benefit from it. But the corresponding challenge in technical terms is the wholesale to retail translation is not available. Okay? So if you read my paper on CGRE that I did for smart grids, I talked about the wholesale to retail translation. What do I mean by that? That means all the benefits, and this is happening in Europe also, it's not just India. Take, for example, one of the European countries where they have tremendous amount of renewable generation in that grid. And when you have a ton of renewable generation and the value and the price of renewable generation is supposed to be very low on paper, and yet the average consumer, and Rahul, I know I'm stealing your thought here, thunder here, but I know this is one of your favorite topics, talks about, I've heard Rahul talk about the value to the customer and what the customer pays, the social impact, right? The customer is paying a ton of more money despite renewables being out there, and the whole purpose of why renewable energy was sold was to lower the bill. So if at the end of the day, if you cannot do the wholesale to retail translation, your entire net zero will fail. The customer has to get that benefit at the end of the day. So this graph, if I could do it, and I've tried multiple ways to do this thing, I'm not able to succeed yet. Maybe someday I'll succeed. So what I do is I tow two graphs. I tow two tables. One table showing the impact and constraints with corresponding technology, and I show a second table showing the wholesale services and the retail services, and show how I can translate wholesale to retail so that the value of those investments taking place, the taxpayer is funding at transmission level, can translate to the corresponding value to the end user. If that doesn't happen, you go kaput. So we already talked about this duck curve, the inverted duck curve, and how the profile evolution from a duck to canyon curve. The duck curve is a famous duck curve concept from California. Talk about during the daytime what happens, initial peak demand, and
I'll be showing it.
Oh, you should? Okay, fine, I'll skip it. He'll cover it, that's fine. So the canyon curve basically meaning that because of solar and everything drops, right? You will talk about it, so I'll skip this. So essentially, I talked about flexibility. I've talked about a lot of these concepts at a higher level, but what this table is showing here is exactly what we talked about earlier. You got long-term flexibility, you got short-term flexibility, and what are the right resources for the right times. So for example, when I did the course at CGRE in Keynes on the whole green hydrogen, I was very intrigued by a question from one of the members of the audience in terms of what kind of a load is an electrolyzer. And this is a fascinating question because to me, in an ideal situation, I would love the electrolyzer load, to have an electrolyzer type of load if I was doing a net zero program at a utility. Why? Because when I get those times when I have excess wind blowing, excess solar, I can pump that and pipe that into the electrolyzer. Why? Because think about this for a second. If my price of power is X, I'm running my electrolyzer creating hydrogen. Now I have to look at the grid parity and market parity, right? If my price goes to 2x, if I'm still using the electrolyzer to generate hydrogen, what have I just done to myself? Now I have to sell the electric power at much higher cost to get that money back, right? So I would rather use electrolyzer at low cost time and sell at a higher cost time. It's all about arbitrage and leveraging the resource and which load is best to be used when kind of a philosophy, right? There's a whole art and science behind it. So I'm not going to focus on what Hitachi does because we'll talk about that later. We have a Hitachi booth. I'm a Hitachi Energy employee, so I will encourage all of you to go to the booth. So now I'll stop here, Rahul. I'll just quickly go through this and I'll stop. So I wanted to show you an energy case study, transition case study that I'm involved with PG&E. PG&E, as you know, is one of the utilities in the west coast of the United States. I won't go through all the statistics here. They're there in the screen for you to read: number of customers, number of connections, number of million miles, how heterogeneous they are, and some of the other factors and elements about PG&E's and what territory they cover. They cover the Northern California part for the most part, northern half of California to mid-central California. So PG&E is building what they call, this is their words, a climate resilient energy system, and they want to deliver it for the state of California. They want to start with safety. This is so important. We haven't touched that word safety until now. There's a whole element of safety in digitalization also that I'll talk about later. And the system that can harness all the clean energy resources of today and tomorrow, and a system that customers can rely on. They want to create a customer-centric system, a reliable system that can actually be driving them towards the net zero of the future, right? They want to have a decarbonized, reliable, safe future. So this is what they talk about, right? This is what they call as the True North strategy, right? It's a 10-year strategy, right? They want the first and foremost foundation of their strategy is the customer. They want to make sure that they are, especially after the wildfires, they acknowledge that they have suffered some, right? So every utility, anytime there's a utility catastrophic incident, they have some impact. And so they want to make sure that they have excellent credibility. They want to deliver an excellent trust and earn the trust of the customer. The second thing is the energy system. They want to architect a resilient, decarbonized energy system. They want to make sure it is optimized. And remember the word orchestration that we talked about? It's all about optimization, right? And they want to continue in investing in this electrification. And how are they going to do it? They're going to do it based on the building on those foundational capabilities that they talk about, right? Safety, efficiency, and a regional self-service model. I think somebody here was from L&T, a couple of folks here, and this has been discussed in a big way. What kind of models can you talk about, right? And this is true for every company, right? Especially you guys are doing the service model stuff, right? Data management, right? So this is kind of what they're talking about. And they will deliver, and they have this, they call it the 3 Ps or something, people, planet, and prosperity. So the current state, right? The current state is they have made tremendous investments in the grid. They have become cleaner now, right? 96% greenhouse gas-free electricity in 2022. And PG&E, like UK, also boasted, California, CalISO boasted last year, one day they were fully 100% based on renewables, right? And they want to increase the number of days they're more reliable. PG&E has received also 1 billion cubic feet of RNG into their system. From a safety perspective, they have an excellent record, and they are more reliable compared to the past. So what does their future look like? What is the future they want to go into, right? The future they want to go into, in a nutshell, if you read all these things, it is net zero. That is the future they want to go into. They want to go to net zero energy transition. That is the bottom line. If you read each and every one of these, it screams net zero, right? And safety, right? And reliability, and resilience, and decarbonization, all pointing to net zero, right? So what are the trends that are driving that change? I know there's a lot of information in here, but they have an electric side of the business and a gas side of the business. On the electric side of the business, they have had the load growth that they talk about, right? 70% load growth in the next 20 years. And this is the part that I was talking about. I have had customers in PG&E territory tell me that they are looking at electrifying their transportation fleet systems. They're looking at more data centers, right? They're looking at more electric buildings. Now, the state that I come from, we are mostly gas-based heating and cooling, heating in the house. PG&E territory is primarily a mix of gas and electric. Most of it, they're shifting slowly into electric, right? And then they're also looking at increase in demand because of the corresponding increase in electrification and electric usage. And so on the gas side of the business, they are transitioning from, the example I gave to you about the feeder, or if everybody on that one feeder is in agreement to go shift from gas to electric, they're allowing the transition. That's actually the PG&E gas example that I gave you. Decarbonization, they're looking at decarbonization in a big way, and then looking at climate change and how to reduce impacts of climate change. So what is really driving the innovation? Electricity is 14% of the state's, electricity contributes to 14% of the state's energy carbon emissions, right? So from a climate change perspective, they're very committed. They want to go to drive towards 100% of clean generation by 2020. They want to have clean energy supply, and they want to also increase different kinds of storage so as to manage to create a flexible system so that they don't have to fire up those gas-fired peaking plants. As a matter of fact, PG&E's neighbor, which is a smaller utility than PG&E, we are in discussions with them. Why? They're trying to replace a 300 megawatt gas-fired system, peaking system primarily, with a corresponding battery energy storage system. I'm in discussions with another one of PG&E's neighbors. Why? Because they're looking at a 500 megawatt thermal system, coal-fired plant. They are talking to, from what I've heard, rumor has it, TerraPower, Bill Gates' organization, right? They're looking at SMR. So the plan is to shift and transition from coal to SMR-based, safe nuclear-based technologies. And then, very important thing that most people forget, train the employees from the nuclear side, so on the thermal side, and bring them into the nuclear side, right? And so this is the picture that I'm presenting, not just PG&E, but PG&E's neighbors and what they're thinking about. What is the risk of not doing these things? The risk of not doing it, if you just keep on increasing your penetration of wind and solar, and you do not orchestrate it with the grid, and you let them be what I call as, not exactly stranded assets, but they are uncontrolled, unconnected, disconnected assets. You have no visibility into what's going on behind the meter to a great extent. That's a huge challenge, by the way. And Glenn, I'm sure you'll agree. Telling a utility to start having visibility of what's going on behind the meter is, typically utilities have stopped at the meter, right? Doesn't exist. And so now, in this new era and new dimension, when you have behind the meter generation, and I'm talking about distributed generation primarily, now you're talking about getting visibility and control and some level of, I would call it, handshake between the utility and the generations, the IPP of some kind, or even that particular entity. And that is one reason I'm driving a committee right now in CGRE of local energy markets and virtual power plants. Local energy market is a concept you're going to hear more and more and more, and I've had some participation from India as well in my working group. It's a developing idea. It's not fully developed yet, but it's going to develop more. So the next thing is retiring the baseload plants like thermal, for example, right? There's risk involved in retiring that and not replacing it with something corresponding. Declining or steady hydro. This was a big issue for PG&E because California was going through a drought. But thankfully, in the last year and a half, we've had so much rain in California, that problem has gone away. Now the bigger problem is how do we keep the dams safe, right? Excuse me. And lastly, finally, the variable weather. The question is, yeah, we got all these rains in the last couple of years. What happened for 2 more years when there is no more rain? But it doesn't stop there. I go back to that key word, orchestration, right? You're gonna have to make sure that all these unorchestrated DERs are orchestrated in some way, form, or shape. What model it will build into, we don't know yet. There's different models being discussed right now. I've spoken with other utilities. They're looking at different kinds of models to get visibility and control, and especially safe handling during storm. And this is the part that very often missed, that when you have resources on the grid that are generation based on IBR, inverter-based resources, and they're putting power in. Typically in a storm situation when there is an outage, a worker goes there, the assumption is there is no power. Well, in this situation, you can't assume that anymore, right? So there is a whole area of handling, of outage handling, storm restoration that will also come into picture. The other side of the equation, we talked about this, is a load, right? The evening ramp rate, which actually happens well past the solar peak. How do you handle that? The mismatch of the system peaks that we talked about. Electrification and load growth. Well, this is both a challenge and an opportunity, right, as we talked about. And last but not the least, we not only have to orchestrate the supply side, now PG&E is now, not just PG&E, but utilities in general are tasked with how do you orchestrate the load growth also in such a way that this can be done in an equitable way. You can do it to net zero, and as somebody mentioned here, keeping the cost to service, the cost to serve as low as possible with the right set of resources. Supply and load, they're looking at three broad areas, and I'll finish now in a couple of minutes. Supply and load, they're looking at supply and load management, and I think I've got another graph here. This is an example from PG&E, but I wanted to give you some more visibility, and I can give you similar data from different other utilities across North America. So they're looking at, for example, this is an example of Carolinas, Duke Energy. I was in a Duke Energy session in a workshop, and I looked at Carolinas, Florida, and other parts of Duke Energy. It's a huge utility in the United States, probably the largest, right, Glenn? Duke? Not the largest. One of the largest. One of the largest, yeah. So you look at this, breakdown of the near-term planned activities from a resource plan. You look at solar, battery energy storage, combined cycle, combustion turbine, onshore wind, pumped storage, hydro, advanced nuclear, and offshore wind, right? So this is kind of the resource plan. And then last but not the least, they're looking at incremental resources needed by 2035. They're looking at grid edge resources, and there's a lot of planning taking place right now, and there's a lot of discussion taking place on how to accomplish and achieve the outcomes from these, right? So integrated grid planning. So grid planning in general has to look at increasing utilization of these new existing, the existing assets and optimizing these new situations, right? Why? Because when you're starting about accommodating at the pace at which these loads are growing, right, you really need to be able to do it in such a way that you can increase the throughput, drive efficiency, keep costs low, and something that I have not mentioned, I should have mentioned here, keep it safe, and last but not the least, optimize the usage of the right flexible load at the flexible resource at the right time. And last but not the least, if it is done properly in conjunction with load, load management, the supply side and the load management, you achieve the bottom line, right? Because you can't just keep on raising rates. And this is part of what the challenge is when you're transitioning from a central generation, base load generation, bulk transmission, and distribution paradigm to variable generation, transmission, distribution, generation distributed across transmission and distribution, and last but not the least, increasing variable load as well. To that paradigm, what is happening is first and foremost, everybody's bill is going up, and there is tremendous resistance to the increase in the power bills. And so this got to be handled in a way that you can't have dramatically increasing rates as well. And then EVs. There is two areas where I say that I've seen a dramatic shift in the last year. And I'd like to get Glenn's and Ravi's inputs down the road as well today, is that whole offshore wind that took off about 2 or 3 years ago in a big way. Now offshore wind is starting facing the chop in many places. Many projects are getting canceled. Why? Because of increasing costs. Now, what I do not know is there a corresponding resistance from the utility as well? I don't know that. Maybe, maybe not. I cannot tell, right? However, the cost has gone up. So the cost base that was used for planning these offshore wind projects is no longer, the cost-benefit ratio is not working out. So quite a few of those projects have been shelved. On the EV side, interestingly enough, I'll give you an example of California where they were looking at 1.2 million charging stations, something like 3 million EVs. We're also facing a dramatic shift there as well, that the adoption of EVs has kind of slowed down. And I think there's different interesting studies coming out about what will be the cost impact of EV to the environment. Is it really green, right? All those questions are being raised. And so, but that is happening. But in PG&E territory, right, they're essentially, driving down installation costs. They're increasing the access for chargers and providing more access to chargers and infrastructure at home, work, and so on and so forth. And last but not the least, how do you connect these more seamlessly? And then again, in a blockchain example that I gave in the blockchain project was a person charging in the home versus a person that is moving from place to place through different utility territories and charging in different utility territories. How do you equitably build those people, right? You can't have a person that you leave your home and go 10 miles away or 20 miles away or even 100 miles away, kilometers away in Indian context. you cannot say that suddenly the person has to pay 5 times as much. Not fair, right? So I think I covered the wildfire issue, some of the mitigation that is being done for wildfires, because this is like flying a 747 and fixing it at the same time, right? The utilities don't have the luxury of shutting everything down because there is a wildfire, fix everything, and then coming back online. Utilities have to fix everything on the go, right? And that's a huge challenge. And so some of the ways that PG&E is addressing these wildfires, and this is why I've got PG&E involved in my working group on the local energy markets and local energy communities, because if there is a public safety shutoff in a community, for example, how does the community thrive in the absence of power from PG&E, right? That is where I increasingly believe that local energy markets and some level of virtual power plant is going to have to come into picture to sustain the power availability of power. And of course, the enhanced power line settings, different protection and control settings, the undergrounding that is taking place, and then the wedge management program, right? And so I know we have covered a lot of things, a lot of items here. I probably have not been able to do justice to all these items because honestly speaking, this is a huge space and area to cover. But hopefully what I'm hoping is that after Rahul is done and Glenn will go after Rahul, because of the timing, Rahul has to leave right away. So you guys talk. In the afternoon, we'll pick up with Glenn, and hopefully you'll hear from Glenn as well. What is the utility doing from an AMI perspective, and then be able to bring this all together. With that, I will stop now. We will have a more detailed, robust discussion in the afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I would have liked to have listened to the 5-hour version because there's so much depth. And I mean, every challenge is an opportunity. And I think that's one of the most important things. I'm scared and also optimistic, excited at the same time. I'm going to avoid using the lectern if that's all right, so you can see me then. So, welcome everyone. And my slides are going to focus more on the policy or the higher level. We've had a fantastic engineering aspect as well. I'm an engineer, full disclaimer, but I focus more on policy issues because the regulatory environment, policy environment drives incentive structures. And 2 disclaimers. The first is, of course, personal. I'm a scholar. I'm a senior fellow with the Center for Social and Economic Progress. I'm also the founding advisor of ISGF. Been there from the start. Helped set it up 15 years ago. And I've worn many hats. I was on the Technology Advisory Board for Southern California Edison, 2005 to 2008. And that was one of the highest awarded smart metering rollouts in the United States. Now, I see a lot of friends that are not from India, which is great. So the second disclaimer is some of my material is India-centric, not because that's the only place on earth that matters, but it's always useful to have an anchor as opposed to average numbers or generic. And so the Indian story is also relevant because India is so large and diverse. You cover a lot of big, small, urban, rural, etc. at the same time. So how many of you are not from India? Excellent, excellent. Welcome. And I would also then love to learn, and hopefully we can keep this interactive a little bit, but mainly for clarification questions initially, and then maybe we'll have time for more discussions towards the end. Is there a clicker? I didn't want to be at this here. Okay. Can we go to full screen, please? So, when we talk about net zero, the requirement is the word zero. We'll come back to this net problem. And if you see the IPCC report, they say by 2050. And most countries have announced pledges. India's is 2070. And a lot of people were concerned, oh my God, that's too late. But we'll show sort of why. So what are the pledges in your respective countries? Can people share if they have a net zero deadline or pledge, and by when? 2060, Indonesia. Okay. Still okay, yeah. 2050, on the target. Any other countries have? So how many, and India, of course, we know is 2070. 2070 is far enough away that it's more understandable, but 2050, and there are countries with 2035, 2040, I'm very scared and skeptical. And I'll sort of show why. So our focus here is to really look at these pathways, and what we really care about, and I give the cheat sheet answers here, is cumulative emissions. The date of zero is almost irrelevant. It is the cumulative emissions that matter. What are the paths to get there? So there's sectoral decarbonization is how most people look at it. Yes, there are views that say you just put a high enough carbon price and everyone's going to decarbonize. Even then it's not equal, because there are what are called hard to abate sectors. And the good news is the power sector is actually one of the easiest in terms of decarbonization. But you can decarbonize 80% very easily. It's that last 20% that is very, very difficult and much harder than some people realize. And then what are the issues? Scaling up. Anand talked about a little bit of these challenges. Just like in the US, transmission is one of the big bottlenecks. It's true worldwide, but it's even worse in the US because NIMBY, not in my backyard, is excessively powerful in the United States. I didn't have in this list land. That's another concern. South Korea will face this. I mean, smaller countries, even Indonesia, because of its disparate islands, has these challenges on how we find sufficient land for sufficient clean energy to have net zero. So that is a major challenge. And then the second area where I spend, my team does a lot of research is on trade-offs, winners and losers. So efficiency is how climate modeling is done. Net zero, what is the quote-unquote cheapest way to get it? But do you think the world is ready where the cheapest solution is you get nothing and you get everything? And that's literally some of the fights and challenges that we're facing, trans-country and within countries as well. So in the IT world, there's an old phrase, cheaper, faster, better. Pick any two. So here, faster translates into more scale. But better includes security, it includes environment, it includes jobs, local jobs, it includes consumer choice. There's so many dimensions. And the real policy question is, what do you do when there are trade-offs? Because if zero carbon energy was secure and cheaper, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. It'll already be happening faster. Next. So I don't know who popularized the phrase, lies, damn lies, and statistics. You'll get these slides, so it'll be bigger then. Here are, from 1990 till recently, the world, as well as several countries, big, small, China, US, India, Bangladesh, etc., Germany. And when people say who needs to do what or what does this mean, you can get a very different answer depending on what lens you apply. So on the left side, you've got total emissions. So the world is obviously the highest line, but now then below that, the highest in terms of country level is China. Oh, sorry, it's the United States, China. These are sort of aggregates around the world. But if you now say per capita, it flips, because OECD countries have very high per capita emissions, while it's much lower for developing regions, which is obvious. But now it's another flip, Because as soon as you talk about a market mechanism, you're now looking at intensity with GDP. So emissions per GDP, you get a completely different answer. Now here, the most emissions per GDP is actually China, because it's a manufacturing-centric economy, amongst other reasons, and coal-heavy. So you put both of those together with high exports of embedded energy. And we'll come to this aspect in a second. Are you able to be here and help? Oh, lovely. Next, please. So just a reminder, and Anand sort of alluded to this as well, that we're talking about decarbonizing, which goes through the power sector. So this is India. Energy flows. This is a Sankey diagram. And you start with coal at the top. Most of your coal goes for the power sector. So if you compare on the left side the primary energy and the right-hand side the end use, you get very different answers. Because in end use, electricity is much smaller than the primary energy because of thermal conversion. So now as we electrify, we're talking about end use based comparisons, but it's the primary that you're getting rid of from an Indian perspective. Indonesia, of course, has gas as well and coal, both. India has very little gas. It's 6% or so only. Korea, of course, imports a lot of what it needs, and nuclear is reasonable. What's the share of nuclear in Korea now? 20%. So in India, nuclear has been around for decades. It's stuck stable at about 3%, 2.5% in fact. So unfortunately, it has not grown as fast. So now, different sectors will decarbonize with different time frames because the technologies to change them take longer. You talked about behind the meter as a challenge. An equivalent challenge is how do you change things that are end user decided? So if I have to change water heaters at homes to heat pumps, for example, that's a lot, millions of end consumers who have to be incentivized, capable, installed, so manpower is an issue. Do you have enough people to do these transitions? Next, please. So 1.5 degrees Celsius, controlling it was always tough. But here's the cumulative emissions now with an older lens. Now you can see that the US, then second is EU, third is China, UK, India, etc. In that order out of these countries shown. Brazil is lower, South Africa is lower, but then their populations are also much lower. So again, lies, damn lies, and statistics. You can get to any answer. You know, the old joke in accounting is, you know, if you ask an accountant what's 2 plus 2, what would you like it to be? So here we also have the same challenge when we come to accounting for emissions, and I'll explain that in a bit. So just as an FYI, India's coal consumption is considered very high, and in our book on coal, we point out that when you correct for per capita and the emissions because of the coal quality in India being lower, the per capita coal usage in India is half the world average. And a greener country, quote unquote, like Germany or the US, uses much more coal per capita, but they also use gas and oil even more. While in India, South Africa, and China, coal is much higher. In Indonesia, the coal share is higher than in OECD countries. So when people say kill coal, the impacts are very different. UK is now down to just negligible share of coal in their power sector. It's much easier to say I'll get rid of coal if you have the natural gas available, which many countries do not. Look at natural gas on the right side. India's consumption is multiple times, tens of times lower than many other countries. And these sorts of statistics apply around the world, that there are differentials. Next. So China offers some insights. I often call it the cleanest and the dirtiest country when it comes to energy. China is installing more clean energy, or producing, than the rest of the world put together in certain sectors. And at the same time, it has not plateaued or stopped its growth of coal. And this is really the kicker for developing countries. Korea is, of course, slightly different, but Indonesia, Brazil, South Africa, India, Nigeria, You talked of 70%, Anand, growth in 20 years, was it? 70% for these countries could happen in 6 years, 7 years. Maybe faster. Maybe faster. And so it's a very different challenge when you want to decarbonize and grow at the same time. And that's the first sort of lesson from a policy planning perspective. Your objective functions are slightly different. Next. So for India, power sector is going to be critical. Luckily, electricity is the easiest to decarbonize. It's about half of emissions. You talked of in the US, it was much smaller. Electricity is total emissions because you use a lot of oil and gas.
In California, it is 14%. It's not across the board.
Okay, in a country, sure. But it's still much lower for the US than India. Thank you for that correction. But now in terms of electricity, energy, capacity, peak, and real time are not the same. That's the real sort of takeaway. And the instruments you need at a policy, at a pricing level, are not going to be the same. I'll skip over some of the details because they were India-centric. Next, please. If you've seen the IPCC AR6 report, the newest assessment review, they showed that if you look at the economy-wide, you have different technologies doing different amounts of reduction. So how many gigatons can you get rid of at what cost? The most interesting are the blue ones. Blue means the costs are lower than reference, meaning it doesn't cost you anything extra to decarbonize because your decarbonized solution is the cheapest. And where are the largest blue? Wind and solar. So wind and solar power is great, but wind and solar power cannot take you to 100% alone because then you will need storage. You'll need grid changes, which have a cost. So the good news for almost all countries is expand variable renewable energy, VRE, as much as you can. And because of this orchestra that we want to get towards, you can actually put in a lot more than people think before you have problems of handling it. It's not 100%, but it's more than where we are adding today. Next, please. So what does the word net really mean? Is it really zero? This is the next question we want to ask, because is it reliant on offsets? And there are two types of markets for carbon. One is a voluntary market, and another is a compliance market. And you would know, for those who track it, that in the EU, for example, carbon prices went as high as about 100 euros a ton. Now they're in the range of 60 euros a ton. Still pretty high. But the voluntary markets have collapsed to $1 to $2 a ton because of quality problems. And that's the issue. If somebody says, and there's a company who I will not name, that we'll have a carbon neutral LNG tanker, what does that mean? It's not like there's no CO2 going to be emitted when you burn it. So I'll come back to this question, because this is a key thing about, accountants. What do you want 2 + 2 to be equal? And here's the kicker and the dirty little secret. Most integrated assessment models, you look at the IPCC's reference ones, they talk about negative emissions, land-based, biomass-based, or even direct air capture. So the only way you keep temperature rise within your bounds that you want is not just by reduction, because sorry to say, the world is not going to do it through reduction. We're not going to achieve 1.5. And even if we tried to, or we're trying to, but the only way you do it is if you do direct air capture and suck out CO2 for decades to keep the temperature within rise, this overshoot model. This is not well appreciated, and it's a sad sort of detail that a lot of people ignore. Why do you need air capture in these things? Well, cement industry, for example, releases CO2 as part of the chemical process. Clinker production, limestone, calcium carbonate, and CO2, it's released. But in many other industries, it's very tough. Long distance aviation, your only choice is SAF, sustainable aviation fuel. Well, then if it's biomass based or e-fuel, it's either expensive or needs a lot of land or both. Next. So metrics, this whole point about measuring. Scope 1, how many of you have heard the term Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3? Sorry, let me make it easier. How many of you have not heard or really gotten into these terms? Good, so thank you. Okay, now more hands go up, so thank you for leading the charge. What these tell you are emissions with different boundaries. Scope 1 is your entity, corporation, school, university, state, whoever you're accounting for, is your own usage of fossil fuels or greenhouse gases. Scope 2 adds electricity, which you use, but don't necessarily generate on site. Now, Scope 3 is the hardest because now you're adding in the supply chain. So even when you do biomass, which is ostensibly carbon neutral, you may be using a truck to carry the biomass between the locations, which will have, today at least, fossil fuel implications. So Scope 3 is the hardest to do. So many companies are now tasked to do emissions accounting. In India, SEBI, the regulator for companies, has said you have to do it for the top 2,000 firms in India are now mandated to do emissions accounting. It's very hard to do because now you need to know what people you deal with are doing. And there's only two ways to do it. And this is the homework that countries and companies need to do. One is survey-based. You sort of figure it out. You question the chain. And the other is closer to equilibrium models or input-output models, which are economy-wide. These are the only ways that you can do it, and they have a lot of limitations. So we have to start this process of proper accounting. Next, please. So how many of you have been to Cochin Airport? World's first 100% solar airport. It's a big sign there. There's a lot of solar panels. Parking lot, all the sides along the runways, empty space. Solar panels, which is great. Do they have any batteries? No. So now ask yourself, how is it a 100% solar airport? And what it does is it banks this electricity with the utility or does an offset accounting with the utility. They overgenerate solar in the middle of the day and in the evening take it back from the utility and call it solar. And this is one of the decarbonization norms that is under Article 6 with, under the IPCC, where there's a lot of debates. Academics, some of us, think it's a bad idea because an offset is like that zero LNG tanker. Someone else's went down and you're claiming credit for it and saying, I am zero. So now let's look at this particular case. Because evening still runs coal, it's not zero directly. But the claim is, well, someone else's coal went down in the middle of the day. Even if this is true, and we'll see why it may or may not be true, there is a cost because middle of the day solar is not the same as evening electricity in price. And that price arbitrage that is born by the utility. So how many of you have heard the terms net metering and gross metering when it comes to solar panels? Indonesia just ended new net metering, I think a week or two ago, I saw the announcement. So net metering is where the consumer gets an offset or an accounting or banking with the utility. It's netted out at the end of a time period, typically a month. So what it means is the consumer can overgenerate in the day, take it back at night, and say that that's my power and my solar power. But what does the utility have to do? A, it is valuing it at a higher rate because the retail tariff of electricity is always higher than wholesale. And second, in the evening, you don't have cheap power, at least in India, because in that evening peak period, it's the most expensive electricity that's needed. So it's not something that will scale. Next, please. So what is green power? This is something every country will not only have to define, it'll have to measure, and then it'll have to check harmonization across transnational accounting norms. So the ministry in India has clarified 2 kilograms CO2 per kilogram hydrogen, but they allow 30-day banking, just like the Cochin Airport. So now a banked hydrogen is relying on offsets. Next, please. So what are the marginal emissions? In the short run, in almost all grids, it is fossil fuel, unless you've got lots of hydro. The grid, as existing, doesn't produce more solar electricity if someone plugs in an EV or a hydrogen electrolyzer or a light bulb. Because wind and solar are use it or lose it. Until I'm at the point of curtailment, meaning surplus RE, my swing producer is something else. In the US, it's gas. In India, it's coal. But in the long run, we'll have a different grid than today. And that's really the hope, which comes back to integrated resource planning with time of day granularity. A lot of policymakers do average numbers. That's a bad idea. Next. So there are two types of emissions accounting. One is attributional, and the other is consequential. Consequential emissions accounting is what offsets rely on. So I will add some coal at night to power the airport, but in the day I'll cut down some coal with that excess solar. Please, please, go back. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So there was a green tariff notification by the Ministry of Power that said that there should be a green tariff available to consumers with a formula that was given. Now, with that formula, we have a paper coming out showing that the costs don't add up exactly. But the bigger issue is the TOD. In the current norms as per MOP, it just says the consumer must be given green power tariff without any mandate that there should be incremental or additional time-matched green supply. So then if you turn green, all it means is in their entire pool, they give you the green power, but now you have just become more brown. It's a zero-sum game unless there's additional green supply based on a time matching of the demand. This was issued this year, 23, sorry, 23, yeah. I have a whole paper on it. We can send you that yeah. Next. So consequential has this issue that in the middle of the day, what do you think happens to that excess solar? Cochin Airport example. What happens to that excess solar that the DISCOM took? Sorry? No, not yet. We're not at curtailment. They'll give it to somebody else. Now, can that somebody else and the airport both be 100% green? No, because you've added coal. So attributional emissions accounting takes totals and apportions it based on end user. So the Cochin Airport, sorry? So here's the thing, it's actually, you're right, up to a point. And the kicker is when you go up the supply curve. So we have a whole paper on defining green that goes into it. It's a very important question. In theory, you could have a 1:1 offset if you were displacing coal 100%, if you were not at a curtailment level, which you will be. When we get to the net zero sort of a world, you will actually be in a world with excess RE a lot of the day, because that's the only way RE works. It's coincident. Solar is very coincident. Wind is a little more spread out. There's some nuances. But the second thing is, okay, I'm going to cut down my slides because this discussion is really important and rich. Thank you. Let's assume I have a world with a bunch of EVs only. It's a simplified model of a country, a world. And I have some gas power, so it can go on and off instantly, not like coal. And I've got some RE. And I have enough RE to do 3 vehicles, but not more, or certain number. And now I add 1 more vehicle. So once I had only, let's say I had enough RE to do 10 large EVs or EV plants or factories or whatever. I have 10, I'm 100% green. Now I add 1 more demand. I don't have enough RE. Now what do? I have to turn on my fossil. Now the question becomes, do I call that car, that last user, dirty? Or is everyone equally dirty along the chain? It's a bit of both. Because it's unfair to say that that car is dirty and that car is clean. Just who woke up earlier in the day. But at the same time, it wasn't the who that mattered. It was the fact that your demand for power exceeded the supply of clean energy that could handle it. And that is where attributional emissions accounting is required. So the fact that even though I did do reduction in part of it, I didn't actually reduce it. At best, consequential will keep you where you are. It will never lower your emissions. That's the key message from these accounting norms.
Well, I think also, Rahul, that whole concept of certificate of origin.
Yep.
I know I talked about certificate of origin from a tracking and tracing perspective for green hydrogen. I think in this new economy, you're going to have to look at that. Every electron has to be tracked, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, before we get to the blockchain level of accounting for it, which is a little bit away, yes. But even before that, right now there is an incentive to label stuff greener than it really is. And so let us not underestimate the appeal of greenwashing. You know, because think of it from a corporate perspective. If I'm a data center, not to pick on them, because these guys use electricity and they're often rich enough to pay for electricity even at a slight premium. They just want green power and they're willing to pay for it. But they don't really want to get into, was it really green? They just want to write a check and be confident that, yes, I got a certificate that says it's green.
Let us talk about in terms of hours. What I'm trying to say is that basically green energy, some way or the other, it's a time of the day. That is what hourly we can say.
And there's a whole slide on that coming up.
Looking into the discussions, every time we are talking about the green energy generation, I would like to add one word in this. We should also talk about green load. What does it mean is that, say we have got 24 hours. We know that at a certain time, the green energy is more, that is renewable energy maybe
Midday. Let's.
At that point of time, if we have got the load, we should call it green load. But what will happen that we are encouraging the loads to come at that point of time.
Absolutely. TOD pricing. Yeah.
If I mean, I know you're short on time. I just want to make one
But someone also telling that the load has to be managed. Right. Because when you are talking about RE and net zero and these kind of time managements, so we have to look into the loads also to be very sensitive to our net zero participation.
Yeah, I understand. You know, I think I just want to make one more mention since you talked about data centers. See, I'm a data center, right? I don't have any details of who's contracting what. Let's say I contract for 25 megawatts of clean energy. I'm just giving an example, right? So now on paper, I'm clean. I'm green, right? Is it really true? No. Because I have contracted for 25 megawatts of green energy. But I'm a data center. I've got multiple locations. So to your point, and I totally agree with you because Rahul, this is kind of the right. Right.
Unless we identify loads also,
and location.
Location as
and
well.
Location.
Load, location.
That is why I brought up the three things in the context of green hydrogen at the beginning of the course that I talk about in the context of every green energy. What is the three things? Electrical, temporal, and geographical. Those are very critical elements of tracking and tracing and billing and calculations as well. Right? Sorry.
So these are exactly very key points, and we'll come to some of these more. So in fact, a green load is either coincident with green supply. So that's one measure. But the second one is what Anant also talked about, which is flexible. So any flexible load should also get a credit or a value for that flexibility that they offer into the grid, because that's worth something to the system and to your greenness quotient both. Next, please. So we've already discussed the problems. The other problem, so if you look at green hydrogen, there's scholarly work and the norms in the US are asking for 3 criteria. One was timely matching, second was additionality, and the third was deliverability, which is the locational aspect to it. So that deliverability and transmission is obvious, it has to be available at the right place. We discussed about this time matching. The third point is additionality, which means would this have been built anyways. So a lot of VRE, you look at that IPCC graph, wind and solar is so cheap that it's getting built anyways. The only thing that happened is this person built it and claimed the credit instead of someone else. Until you are getting new RE that wouldn't have been built otherwise, you're not actually displacing any coal, to your point that you had asked. And this additionality issue is already there in the West, not yet in India because we have such high growth. This is where that growth of demand question is still there. But if you look at the 2030 target for India for solar, it is so high that you will hit the problem of additionality, and the dual of that is curtailment. Next, please. So I'll skip over what the implications are on hydrogen. In the interest of time, you'll have these. And these are also in our paper on defining green. It's on the CSEP website. So if you don't have additionality, you may not comply. So for each country, your norms have to be not only defined, measured, but in harmonization. Because green hydrogen, if you make it with banking in India, it does not qualify for greenness by European definition. It's not harmonized. Next. Additionality was that is it, for example, in Europe, they've defined for like a particular green steel tender, it should be dedicated additional RE capacity for said hydrogen. That's additionality. So now it's very tough to actually quantify. So in the US, under IRA, this is that Inflation Reduction Act, which is a clean energy sort of a system, they've clarified you're supposed to use a GREET model to actually look at what the grid looks like for this load. And by adding a certain load, here's what my mix is optimal. And then I compare how much additional green went between the two states of the world. So you cannot just do it at the margin, because this is that whole problem of long run, short run. In the short run, the only thing you do is you run your grid differently, your existing assets. But in the long run, you choose which supply to put in. Now, if my demand is entirely in the middle of the day, great, solar wins. It's no storage required. But if all my demand is hypothetically, it's a burst from 6 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. in the evening for half an hour only, then I would go for a peaker oriented. Now, if it were steady and predictable and only half an hour, batteries can work. But if it was varying but overnight, then batteries have larger difficulties. So that's this question of what is the additional green supply before you can account for it as being incrementally green.
In other words, you cannot double count. If you are going to count for certain amounts of renewable capacity for your meeting your RPS requirement, if I'm going to put an electrolyzer and I'm going to add, that's going to have more renewable demand, I cannot say, oh, I already have that, I can use it here.
It's a zero-sum game otherwise. Otherwise, it's a zero-sum game. Yes. So right now, the norm is, for example, in hydrogen or rooftop solar, rooftop solar for residences is net metering. So there is an offset banking mechanism. For hydrogen, there is a 30-day banking that's allowed. So right now, it is almost at the model of encouraging these nascent spaces. But rooftop solar is not as nascent or toddler as it used to be. Hydrogen, yes. But, you know, look at Western Australia. Something like, I mean, how's the penetration of rooftop solar in different utilities in the US percent? Not real high. So Western Australia, 1 out of 2 homes is rooftop solar. Yeah, it's not that high. But it'll be in pockets. The other thing we have to remember, whenever someone gives you a number, it's that local granularity that matters. It's not the national or even subnational average. Yeah. So we'll skip these slides on the lack of clean electricity with high PLFs or capacity utilization factors, because that's what you need for clean hydrogen. Storage, if we go back. Just an observation, go back, go back one more. Yeah, oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry, next one, please. Yeah. So we've seen these lithium ion survey numbers that talk of $130 per kilowatt hour. Those are automotive heavy, the BNEF lithium survey. This is the grid scale. So this is the volume weighted one for mainly automotive. And this excludes an inverter. Because when you go for grid scale storage, you need more electronics and other things. Next. So if you actually had cheaper storage, it's still a non-trivial cost of this. And we have a whole series of analysis. Again, like Anand said, it would take a whole hour to go through the assumptions because you cannot do average-based accounting. So that's one of the other key takeaways I'll emphasize in a minute. Next. So next, sorry. So power sector has a path forward. VRE, it can do a lot more. Second, curtailment is not a problem. You will have a world where you're throwing away electricity. That's okay, up to a point. Strategic curtailment. It's the how do I meet the net demand, which is really the challenge. Because time of day is going to be the biggest challenge for many countries. You would have seen this famous duck curve. How many of you have seen it? I'm sure a bunch of you have. Yeah. This is the actual reality called a canyon curve, where it's not just a duck. The actual was far deeper and wider than anyone predicted. So this is California's duck curve, where they are down to 0 in terms of net demand. Go back, sorry. No, this is not India. India will have greater challenges because you cannot go down to 0 because coal has a flex limitation. You have to keep it running in the middle of the day because you'll need it in the evening. California has, I think, 0 coal. So it's much easier. You can turn on and off again.
Chart, actually. You're showing the caliphate chart.
Correct, but I'm saying it has no coal capacity. I just want to check that there's no coal. So India and countries that have coal will have a different capability curve amongst their assets. Next. The emphasis, the key takeaway, cost, price, and value are not the same. We discussed this from a net metering arbitrage. Evening is more expensive. This is a recent Cal ISO, just last month. Look at the prices. They turn negative in the middle of the day. Now you may say there's no market in India. Well, there is. Next. This is the day-ahead market in India. 12 months data till a few months ago, till September. Notice, middle of the day, the prices are measurably lower than 5 rupees a kilowatt hour. This is 5,000 per megawatt hour differential. These are the monthly averages for the Indian case. This has already happened with what, 65,000 megawatts of solar-ish? Now imagine when we're at 240. You will be at a TOD, additionality, and curtailment level of problem. Next. So the way forward is we need to link the time frames. Green hydrogen, of course, is a longer term. The power sector for India or Indonesia and other countries would be that you want to plateau the use of fossils before you worry about getting rid of them. I'm not enamored of saying I have to end everything. I want to stop growing it so that any asset that you build will at least last you its 20, 30, whatever economic life that you would expect out of it. But whatever coal is built should be cleaner, including FGD and local air pollution, and more flexible than anyone thought before. Right now, the norm in India is 55%. They're targeting 40%. There are plants newer that can be spec'd to 25% output level without oil support and so forth. Sorry, Nick, go if you could. Go back, sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Scaling is the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge for the net zero, Anant alluded to it as well, and I'm sure we'll hear about the utility side and consumer side from Glenn. The electricity world talks in decades. The electricity talks about 3 to 5% sort of shifts in organic growth and all of this. But the transition needs something much faster because A, we're also starting from a lower base. So if you're talking of wind and solar, which are today just a few percent in the total energy mix, not just electricity, and they need to eventually become 90% or 80% hydro and nuclear are still carbon free, then now imagine the speeds at which you need to grow these. And then the last observation is we have to stop using levelized cost of energy, LCOE, because it's not a portfolio or system level accounting measure. LCOE, the cheapest is solar. Wind costs more. That is why in India wind did not grow so much till recently. But wind is worth more in the evening because it gives you more diverse supply. So we have to use portfolio analysis when doing planning. So these are my, thank you.
Thank you so much,
And
sir.
thank you for setting it up brilliantly, Anand.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing this knowledge with us.
And I'll be available afterwards, and you can always connect. Any just quick.
What's your thought, and I know from the Indian perspective, we have the infrastructure for, gas and all this steam.
24 gigawatts of gas power plants are underutilized. Yes.
So, and the important thing is the taxation portion here in India. Coal is less as compared to the natural gas, and the footmark on the environment, gas is less. So I ask, I know it's a regulatory question and with the government, but it's a practical.
So we have books on both coal and gas. So this is a topic I know excruciatingly painfully well. And the answer is only partly what you've said. Yes, there are cost differentials on what they tax. But now the question is not just gas versus coal, but coal versus other countries' coal. Our taxation on Indian coal is actually higher than most other countries because of the coal cess, DMF, royalty, and so many. Plus railways. Let us not forget Koila. Coal in India cross-subsidizes passengers in the railways. It overpays by 45%. So that cannot be ignored. Yes, taxation is one of the instruments that governments have. If you introduce a carbon tax, obviously things will shift. But here's a question. If I relabel existing taxes as a carbon tax, how much are we paying for petrol and diesel today in taxes in India or in many countries? Any estimates? It's over $100 a ton CO2. They're very high. But that didn't make it go away. We still use it. So that's one of my concerns and limitations on just saying, attach a price to carbon and the economy will get rid of it. What if there's no alternative? So taxation is important, but the underlying molecule is what really drives it. India doesn't have cheap natural gas. Offshore KG didn't deliver. Cheap domestic gas is prioritized for fertilizer and certain other users. That's the reason power sector is low on the pecking chain. That's the bigger differentiator. But gas, so in my paper on gas and the power sector, what I point out is the value of gas is higher than just the kilowatt hours it gives. So if we value peaking power, flexibility, and other things properly, even a small volume of gas, medium capacity, is worth a lot that countries should keep afloat.
I think it all goes down to what is your bottom line target. So you got to set a target first. So when we do a workshop of this sort,
So
with,
I will need
right?
to leave. Thank you, everyone, but I'm available. You can get my, on our website, my email, contact, everything is there, and hope to continue conversation. I'll be back in a little bit, and we'll continue.
In the afternoon.
Yeah.
We'll do, yeah. But I just want to let, this parting thought before lunch. I don't want to be between, yeah, Rahul. So the parting thought before lunch is, we'll do in the end, no? We'll do in the end. So the parting thought is, as we are doing this picture here, is what are your goals? So when I do a workshop like this, there's a lot of questions that we ask, right? And one of the questions that we ask is, what is your target? What do you consider to be carbon-free versus clean? The two are not the same, right? And then you have to also consider the flexibility elements that I talked about at the beginning. And last but not the least, who actually is doing the paying part, the who pays, who sees part. That is where if one sector is actually subsidizing some other sector, right? We got to look at that calculation as well in the end. So anyhow, that was a good morning session, I thought. Rahul did a great job. Thank you so much. After lunch, we will have Glenn go, and then my colleague Mani Vadari will speak remotely to us, and then we hope to have a more robust discussion of different topics. So please enjoy your lunch. Thank you.